We'll open the meeting of the Hamilton Planning Board Tuesday at 7. I can't see my time, but it's about 7:10 for the January 4th, 2022 meeting. And welcome everybody and Happy New Year. On the agenda is the Senior Housing Special Permit public hearings continued for Chabaco Capital Partners LLC. A site plan review for 656 Asbury Street, and then board business. So first we'll do a roll call to identify attendance. So start with Bill. There he is.
Present.
Bill
Wheaton, present.
Okay. Richard
Boroff, present.
Lori
Boyu, present.
Emil
Dawkins, present.
Pat Norton
Pat Norton, present.
Marnie
Crouch, present.
Jonathan
Poor, present.
and Rick Mitchell, present. Okay, with the board's forbearance, I'm going to suggest we take the site plan review because hopefully that's only going to take a short period of time rather than because I think the senior housing permit is going to be a rather lengthy discussion. And rather than holding that person up for a couple of hours, I think it would be better to take that person first if they're available, Patrick, or
are you folks available to present?
I don't see them on my screen at all when I flip back and forth.
who are we looking for, Patrick?
Let's see, Alex and Kristen.
Last name?
They're both different.
Okay. Corey, do you?
Is it
Sorry.
Kristen Griebel on the list?
Is it? Say it again, Corey.
Looks like Kristen Griebel.
Patrick?
Patrick, I can provide some information. I looked up Iron Axe Farm. It's actually an LLC, and its managers are Alex Coccinelli and Stacy Apple, if either of those individuals are on your list. It's such
Thank you,
an
Marnie.
really.
Thank you, Marnie.
Doesn't look like or sound like they are available.
What are the names of the people again?
Stacy Apple and Alex Ceccinelli, Ceccinelli.
Yeah, I don't see either of them in the attendees list.
I don't either.
All right, well, we tried. So then we should move on to the Senior Housing Special Permit public hearings continued for Chabaco Capital Partners LLC. And I think all of us received a packet with some significant changes to the site. And I'm hoping that Jill is available to walk us through that.
I am. Can you hear me, Mr. Mitchell?
I can hear you.
You can't see me. I think that, is that the process? It's just audio?
Did you log in as a participant?
You can't. You just log in and then you have to recognize me as one, right, and then promote me.
Oh, okay.
I'm fine like this. It's up to the board, but I can't share my screen then, I don't believe.
No, I don't
yes,
think
you have to be a participant to share.
All right, let me promote you.
You might want to promote, so if I may, you might want to promote me Granite Engineering, which is Brent Cole, Larry Smith, and Bill Fleming,
Okay, Bill Fleming is way down at the end,
right,
Patrick.
and Julia Dickinson as well. That's our team. I can send you a list. There we go. I got it. Thank you, Patrick.
So Stacy Apple has raised her hand since starting this conversation as well, in case you want to backtrack.
Well, if we can, I'd like to do that just because I'm hate to have them sitting and wait for 2 hours or an hour and a half. If that's okay with the board and Jill, would be probably a slight delay of probably 15, 20 minutes.
Oh, no, those people for the site plan, please, I understand. And I applaud you for doing that for them. I
Okay,
will edit myself and on video myself.
all right, very good. So we have Stacy, we see you and you need to come off mute.
Thank you.
So sorry for probably thrusting you into the limelight before you thought you would be on, but we thought as a courtesy, we'd ask you to present first because we have a very meaty project that we've been working on for about 6 months, and it could take several hours of discussion, and I didn't want to have you wait.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So Patrick, do you want to introduce this and then we'll turn it over to Stacy and I'm sorry, what's
Alex.
That's okay. Alex.
Alex? Thank you. Stacy and Alex.
Great, thank you. The site plan review application from Stacy and Alex is basically to place greenhouses on the former Patton property. This is the property that actually had been before the planning board a number of years ago for a medical marijuana facility. This is in no way in connection to that. As the board is aware, that property is owned by the Essex County Greenbelt. As I understand it, Alex and Stacy have a lease with the Essex County Greenbelt and want to run the farm, which I think is really exciting for the community and certainly for them. Our Massachusetts general law allows for farm stands and farm operations throughout the Commonwealth to help keep some of the rural character of the state, as well as allowing those like Stacy and Alex who make it their life's work. So we're excited to have them. And Alex and Stacy, if you wouldn't mind to in detail discuss what you're proposing to the board.
And if you can just hold on one moment, Alex,
Yep.
just for the board and the public who may be interested in this, and Patrick, I'd like you to clarify this just so we're clear for all the board members. Is this an approved use? Under site plan, we can condition.
It is an agricultural use.
Yeah, so it's a permitted use. So we can condition it, but not deny it. Is that correct? Oh, Patrick, you've frozen. Oh dear. Life with electrons that go wild. Okay, Patrick we'll defer that question when Patrick rejoins us. So Alex, why don't you go ahead and give us an overview of what you're trying to do with this piece of property?
Sure. Yeah, so like Patrick said, we signed a lease with Greenbelt, and we were farming there this past year, just growing vegetables in the ground. And then, so we're proposing to put up 3 greenhouses, or really they're high tunnels, 2 high tunnels and 1 greenhouse. The difference being that high tunnels are unheated, greenhouses have a heater. And then a small shed that we would have a self-serve farm stand at.
Okay, and so this is going to be operating, can you, any more details year round or?
It wouldn't be, well, I mean, we would be farming there year round. The small farm stand would be just seasonal, spring, summer, and fall.
Okay. And what are you growing?
We grow a variety of different vegetables. So we do, it's really very similar to what Green Meadows used to be. So we have about 40 different vegetables. We'll be taking care of the blueberries across the street, and we'll be planting, a variety of different culinary herbs. We'll be growing approximately 6 acres of 5 to 6 acres of veggies, and then we'll be cover cropping the rest of it, of the farm.
Okay. And are you doing any, is this just retail or are you doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I have the term, is it CSA?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, we'll do a CSA there too, as well. And that includes, it's about 100 families, and they come once a week to pick up. About 100. It's actually a little bit less because we have a second pickup in Gloucester. So it's probably closer to 70 families that pick up once a week.
And will the shed be the retail outlet?
It's sort of temporary as we, there's later plans to construct a barn, but in the meantime, we need, some place to kind of conduct business out of.
So does that mean the shed will be used for retail?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Self-serve.
And will that be located approximately where the old building was that served as the retail outlet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I think.
Sorry. Just for my edification, because I haven't been there since they closed about, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Is that parking lot still is in good shape and will it accommodate?
Yes. There's probably, I'm sorry, did you say how many it can accommodate?
No, but that was my next question.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's still in great shape. And it can accommodate about 40 cars, right? It's about 40 cars. It's a fairly large parking lot. I mean, if you really crammed them in, you could probably easily fit 70 at one time.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to other board members for questions.
I had a couple of questions. How do you intend to heat the greenhouse? Will you have any type of a propane tank?
Yep, it'll be propane heated.
And then one of the questions involves, irrigation and water lines. And then another question I had is whether you'll have facilities for the workers, whether you have some type of septic system there, or what you're going to use for facilities for the people working in the greenhouse and in the retail area.
Yep. So there's the irrigation pond in the Plains field that we can use, and then there is also a town water hookup, and then we will have a composting toilet set up, and then in the meantime until we have a real building built.
Oh, and one other question I had, because as an equestrian, I have ridden back there. Are there any easements on that property?
Not on the property. There's the trail that goes through it.
Right.
But and then there's the driveway that services the 2 houses behind the farm. But I don't think there's any easements on the property itself.
I remember there was a trail.
Yeah, that trail is, yes.
And will
So
you
that-
enable people to use that trail, or will you object to people using that trail?
No, yeah, Greenbelt, it's a part of our lease. That's a public trail.
Okay.
Other questions from the planning board?
I have a couple questions. Is it possible for someone to allow me to share my screen?
I think that will be Patrick.
You should be good to go, no?
Yeah, I think
Shall I try?
you're not able to then. Or,
Down at the bottom on mine, there's a bar and one of the
There we
items
go.
on the bar.
Okay.
is
There we,
green.
we're all set.
He's got it.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
so
looking at
this is a
Jonathan
fuzzy
Ford.
picture, but we received
there's-
a site plan, and here are the three greenhouses here. Here's the shed, here's the parking area. The lot lines are kind of these red lines here. And what I did is I overlaid this on a GIS map because I was a little confused about the context. And I was also especially interested in this barn here. Can everybody see my cursor? The rear barn?
Yeah,
Now it's sort of, it's set 52 feet off the lot line, whereas these are set 30 feet. And so what this shows is it shows the shared driveway that comes around. Can you sort of see that? And then there's
Yeah.
some other lines in GIS that I don't really know what they mean. So I just thought maybe the applicants could, using this plan as context, talk a little bit more about the reasoning for the placement of the barns and their context. Is this drawing clear enough to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the larger greenhouse that you see up here, I guess to the west, yep, that is, we're basically placing that in the same footprint that they had an existing greenhouse. So it just made the most sense to put it, where they've already leveled out an area. There's pea stone gravel down there, so it just made the most sense to put it there. And then the two other greenhouses, they will be for growing vegetables in the ground. So we want to put it as, give ourselves the maximum amount of growing space in that larger front field. So that's why we tried to put them as close as we could to the lot line, so that we can maximize our growing space.
And as you look at this plan, again, we approximated this. I didn't really know how to set this up because I didn't have quite enough information. Would you say this feels about right as far as where the shared driveway is in relationship to the lot line? And does
Yes.
the driveway sort of wrap around like this?
Yep, that looks pretty much exactly like how the drawing was.
Okay. So I guess my other question would be, are there any other changes to circulation in terms of roads or to Marnie's point, any trails, any changes to the curb cut, any alterations to this shared driveway?
Nope.
So this feels like a relatively accurate sort of set of context arrangements here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not actually making any changes to the driveway, are you?
No, nope.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So while I have this image up, does anybody else on the board have any questions about what they're looking at?
My recollection is that this area is really quite level. Is that correct? That there's not much in the way of slopes there. It's pretty level.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
So if nobody has any-
Jonathan, can you use your cursor to say where the two houses are?
There's a building at the juncture here, I think, right here. Is that right, Alex? Is it like an outbuilding?
Yes. So
And then
yeah, I
there's
think
two
it's actually
houses. And there's a house back here and another one somewhere in here.
exactly.
And then there's something else up in here, pretty far back. Is that right?
I don't think there's anything on lot 4A.
Okay.
There's no existing structures.
So
there.
it's all over in this direction here.
Yes. Yep.
I didn't save my other, I had a clearer screenshot. I mean, I could go on to Google Maps if Bill, you wanted to see bigger context.
No,
But for
no,
me,
that's
the main reason I wanted to see it was just to see where these barns were in relationship to that driveway. And again, this is a super rough approximation. It's just overlaying the survey on our best understanding of how it links to GIS.
Just a correction, Jonathan, they're greenhouses, not barns.
I'm sorry, yes, I meant to say greenhouses.
And Jonathan, on your picture, where is the retail area?
I think they're talking about the retail area being this small building here as a temporary structure. Is that correct, Alex?
And that's a parking lot right next to it.
This is the parking lot right here.
Right.
And you can sort of see the gray
Yep.
thing in here. And this is some sort of a curb cut, I think, in the middle of it.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly.
The only abutter besides the town of Hamilton and your landlord is an entity called 25 Butterfield LLC. Have you been in contact with that entity, and do they support this project?
We haven't been in contact with them besides sending out the notification.
And are you sanguine about the address for this 25 Butterfield LLC? Because I did actually do a search with the Secretary of State's office, and I have found a different address for that limited liability company, and it's 9 Scotts Way in Essex, Massachusetts. But
Yeah, he's the owner of, oh God, the tree
Ma-
company,
Mayor.
Mayor Tree.
How old is your baby?
Sorry about that. He's
It's
11
not
months.
Something to be sorry about. We've all had kids.
He's 11 months old.
Ah, cool.
Yeah, he's really excited.
Yeah.
Okay, so
There
I'd
we
like
go.
to-
There's your wife.
I'd like to ask one question. These greenhouses, are these going to be sort of off-the-shelf types of greenhouses?
Yep.
And you say there are 2 types. One is a tunnel, is it? I was trying to read your writing on it.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Tunnel. So that would be a plastic covering then on metal
Correct.
hoops.
Correct. Yep.
I just wondered if you could get a cut from the manufacturer to include with the application, just so we have a good idea of what the buildings look like that we would approve.
Sure. I can
they're approved.
get you a picture of it. Absolutely.
Great.
They're the classic kind of
Yeah.
Gothic. They call it a Gothic style. It's
Yeah.
not the Quonset like
Yeah.
up on you. It's more of like comes to a peak. But yeah, I can get you a picture of it.
Yeah, just can you include that in your application
Of
package?
course. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So here's the Google Maps. So here's the accessory building here. Here's one building. Here's another building. I guess, yeah, you're right. There's no buildings back here, but hopefully this gives you a clearer idea of context. Anybody want me to zoom in or out?
no, I think that's
Nope.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I stop sharing that. Yeah, that useful, or
I think
everybody all
we're
done with
good.
that?
I think
Yeah.
we're good.
Great.
Thank you, Jonathan. So any other questions from the board? Hearing none, does somebody want to make a motion to approve the application or the greenhouses at 656 Asbury, as well as a retail agricultural operation?
I move to approve the,
Sorry, Rick, I don't see anyone's hand raised, but I didn't know if you wanted to address I think there's one question out there, but it's more of a comment.
okay.
I don't know if the public wanted to comment, or there's no hands up in the public.
Well, they're both from Jim Younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just says community supported agriculture. This consists of a community of individuals pledged to support a farm operation, so the farm land becomes either legally or spiritually the community farm. the growers and the consumers providing mutual support, sharing risk benefits of food production.
They were both supportive comments.
That's right.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
response to Pete asking what CSA was.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second?
Second, Bill Wheaton.
Okay, so Richard made a motion, Bill Wheaton seconded it. So we'll go around the proverbial table. Jonathan, or
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Marnie,
Marnie Crouch, aye.
Emil,
Abel Dahlquist, aye.
Ori,
Roy Beaulieu, aye.
Richard,
Richard Boroff, aye.
Bill,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
and Rick Mitchell, aye.
Rick,
Okay.
there are three people on my thing here that have questions. Do we want to look at them?
Well, we just did look at,
Yeah, it's the same thing. All due respect, I am answering the questions. That was, they're all
Yeah, I had
the
answered
same
one
thing from Jim
in the
Young.
background.
Yeah.
all right, let's move on.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right, thank you very much and good luck with your farm operation.
Thank you so much.
When are you going to be in business? Next
year.
spring, summer, and fall?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you and good luck.
Thank
All
you.
right, now we're back to our originally scheduled program, senior housing special permit continued for Tobacco Woods Capital Partners LLC at 133 Essex. Bill and Larry and assembled applicants, thank you for your patience. Now we have a clear table for presentation of the modified plan.
So good evening, Jill Mann here.
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to give everybody sort of the parameters of the discussion here, we have allotted approximately 30 minutes for your presentation, 30 minutes for questions, and 30 minutes for the public to make any comments or have questions. That's flexible, especially given the extent of the modifications that you're proposing, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that we want to have some equilibrium in terms of discussion.
So
Jill, I'm, don't mean to interrupt. Somebody is saying, one of the people that are watching saying they can't see Bill. Can I just say to them, scroll across the top and you'll have a bar with all the people, all of the members, and there's an arrow you can click back and forth. Excuse me for
That was an old
interrupting.
comment from when he was on photo.
All right, so no more interruptions for Jill. Jill,
Thank you.
got it.
So happy New Year. Jill Mann here on behalf of Tobacco Hill Capital Partners, the petitioner in connection with an application for senior housing special permit. First, I'd like to say I did review the minutes from the December 7th, and yeah, I found them pretty useful in trying to formulate responses and to be able to better present information to this board, because I understand that it's very difficult at times to look at things. I think Mr. Poor and Mr. Dahlquist said, look, try and get a smaller scale, well, a larger scale plan for the most part, condensing everything, which actually just translates into one sheet versus many, and then provide the information so it's consumable to the general public, which is something that we did and we've provided for an existing conditions plan, basically, which was what was asked for. I just want to go through some of the application process because it appeared to me that during the last hearing, the board was a bit confused about the interrelationship between the open space preservation farmland provisions and then the senior housing. So with regard to how we identify conservation areas, how we, proceed, and what our obligations are and what the obligations of the board are to be able to best address the project is to have a pre-application hearing in which to address all those things. So I just want to make certain that, when the board is looking at that section 8.2.525, that they understand that it's been complied with and that a duly appointed and sitting board actually allowed us to file our application because we weren't allowed to do that until we met that hurdle. If you'd like, I can, it's probably a good idea. Let's just share the screen. Let's just get it done and let's be quick about it. So I actually, I should be sharing, but nothing will allow me to now. Can you see my screen? I'm
No,
frozen. Everybody's frozen. Isn't that odd? Okay, it says I'm sharing the screen. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
we can see
Okay.
the small profile. There's Rick now.
Yeah, it's very, oh, here we go. Okay, now it's going. I apologize. I don't know why it was kind of a mosaic at one point. So I'm just going to quickly go through those provisions because I don't want to belabor the point and I want to make sure we just address it because I appreciate truly that rubric you provided. It makes life a lot easier. You know, I use that, believe it or not, along with my submission, which has all of the information. I think that we can address a lot of your open points. So basically under 8.2.5, right, I just pulled the zoning bylaw for you. So basically here is what the provision says. If the application has an open space element, which we do, then we have to, the requirements section 8.1 of the OSFPD pre-application conference and permit design process apply. The most important provision of this particular section is following the conclusion of this procedure, right? An application may be filed. So before we were actually allowed to file, we had to meet that element. So then what does that particular pre-application conference require? So clearly the primary purpose, and I think all of the board members, I'm not going to even single out any one of you, all of you said, look, we need to understand better what the conservation areas are and not just what the development areas are. And I appreciate that because you want to have foresight when you're trying to figure out, is this you know, can we actually provide a better condition or something to make the project better, which I think you have, by the way. So the primary purpose is to identify those natural features. It's basically the trails, right? Abutting parcels, anything with regard to open space, agricultural uses, etc. And then the secondary purpose, which is obviously very near and dear to my heart as well as Larry Smith's, is the secondary purpose is to enable a developer to proceed without overburdening the costs. So essentially, this is a special permit, right? We have a board that has a discretion as to how to condition the plan. And I think you said it best at the last hearing. You said the whole point of a senior housing special permit is not to find grounds to defeat it. That's not the point. The point is to try and make the project better, to work cooperatively with the developer to make sure we give you a project that you can be proud of as well as we. And I think, you know, a lot of the comments, and Mr. Mitchell spoke to them, are going to be shown when we show you the changes in the plan that we're proposing. So I just wanted to make sure that the board understood that that was the requirement, and then relative to pre-application. And then, you know, what do you have to do? You have to identify conservation areas, and they were all identified in the plan submitted. You know, those are basically woodlands. It's the site. You know, farmland, we showed the farmland. Wildlife habitats, it's the property. Connections, there aren't any architectural or archaeological or historic sites. Scenic views, we show them. We even walk them at one point. And we do show all that. And again, we identify them during, what does it say, the pre-application conference, and that's the point. We delineated the proposed development area, very important because we wanted to limit what we were doing, because there's a lot of opportunity for developers to subdivide the land and to make it such that it's the most intense development they can get out of it. And Mr. Smith chose not to do that. Because as you know, we're limited to 50 units on this particular property. So we have far in excess of that based on the density, but we chose to limit it and to not subdivide the land to be able to get more housing, not in terms of senior housing, but to do separate permits. I mean, I think that was very critical, and that was a part of the function of the pre-application process. We defined all that to the board, and we explained that that was what we were going to do at the time. We located all the development units, we located the roads and trails, and we didn't have a lotting plan because we don't have lots. So I just want to make sure that everybody understood that based on the bylaw itself, we met those requirements. We did a full submittal application memo that was submitted on March 23rd. And we actually, if you believe, and it's part of your package, we identify everything in our application memo to you. And then I'm not going to go through it, but we did provide to you the minutes, just basically confirming the fact that we did in fact review all of our requirements under those particular sections, 8.2.25, 8.1.7, and 8.1.12. And just because I think it's important for you to see, we wanted to show you the existing conditions with the slopes. I'm going to have Brent Cole in just a moment explain to you some of the concepts that were brought up by, I think it was Mr. Dahlquist and Mr. Poor relative to the slopes and why they apply or why they truly don't. Their definitions and they're helpful in understanding certain components, but they don't really have an impact because your bylaw doesn't have any kind of a prohibition or regulation relative to slopes, nor does any other state application, including stormwater management or any kind of DEP regulation. But nonetheless, I think it's important for you to see in color what the actual components of the plan are. So what we had submitted to you was this particular plan showing the existing conditions. And obviously we outline for you the development area. You can see it in this dark hatched line. So that's our development area. And we outline it completely. So if when you received the package, you saw that we outlined what all of the slopes are. So we colored them to make it even more relatable and easier to read. So the dark areas are those areas with greater slopes, and the light areas are the areas that are relatively flat and or flat. We identify the conservation areas for you. We don't identify the buffer because that's not fully protected areas. Under the Wetland Protection Act, the buffer is not necessarily always protected, but you do have to file and for an order of conditions. But under your local bylaw, you can build outside of the 50-foot, outside of the 75-foot area, and you can not do anything within the 50-foot. So, I mean, you do have limitations, but you can build in the buffer. And we prefer to just show you where the actual wetland is, which is an actual resource that's required to be shown as part of the pre-application process, which is shown. And then you can see that we identify the farmland, obviously, and we identify the trails are shown, but very difficult to see on the plan. So basically, that is the existing condition plan, and that shows all of the topographic and, if you will, resource areas, because everything on this site is basically forested. It's a vacant site, other than the farmland, which is lot 2, which is farmed. It's basically a vacant site, and we are preserving the farmland, which was of importance to the board when we presented, because as I said, there was an opportunity to do other things, but Mr. Smith thought that it was of greatest importance to maintain the farmland quality, which required maintenance of that area. So we can ask questions, I know, on another component, and I'm trying to think if I want Brent to talk about his stuff now, or if I want to go through the upgrade. Now let's go through the plan, the changes. I think it's pretty important and imperative to go through this particular plan. So here we are, we have the updated grading plan. We actually have the second sheet, and I'm just going to flip to it quickly, that shows a close-up of the front portion and the entrance to the site. What we ended up doing, and I give credit to the board for discussing this, asking us for a visual from Chabaco, asking us to do site maps. Mr. Wheaton, who is very vocal in asking us to do something so that we don't have buildings right on Chabaco, and also asking us, is there something you can do to preserve that ledge face along Chabaco Road? And we went back and sharpened our pencils, and with a great deal of time and effort, redesigned the site to actually relocate those units. And as a result of that, we have a undisturbed visual from the center line of Chabaco of 250 feet. So we provided that very, very large buffer, if you will, where there's absolutely no structures being proposed into the site for that distance. Now, clearly, in order to put the roadway in and to grade, we have to clear certain elements of that access, and we have to create a leveled area, which is why you see a clearing to the bottom of your screen, whereas we show a clearing against the roadway, and that's what we've done. So I want to go back up here. So basically what you're seeing is that we did actually provide for you an enhanced visual screen from the front. We saved that ledge that was existing along Chabaco. We do have still some work to do and some regrading of the area to allow us to enter the project, but we did provide for that change, which was very material. In addition, I recall the board saying, look at where are your medium and small units? Because for the most part, our units varied only in style and usability of the footprint. But what we have done is actually vary the sizes and provided you with small and medium units in this particular site. And you can see them where it's basically units 28 and 27. They're smaller units, 29 and 30, medium-sized units, 49 and 50. I mean, we could go through the whole project, but we have actually altered the site and redesigned it to address those concerns. At this point, I am going to let Brent from Granite Engineering discuss the slope elements, and then if I may, come back to some of the comments made relative to our compliance with the zoning bylaw, for example, LID. But at this point, Brent, would you please unmute yourself and allow yourself to give a presentation to the board, and I will stop sharing so you are able to share. There you go. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Jill. For the record, my name is Brent Cole with Granite Engineering. To my right is my colleague, Jeff Merritt. I think Jill did a good job of explaining the plan that I assume you guys can all see that represents the existing conditions with some color that we added for you guys. My plan similar to this was presented at the pre-application hearing, but I think with some added color, you guys can kind of understand what we're representing here. It is our understanding that a slope map was presented to you guys at the last hearing by a board member. And in that slope map, there were some different slopes that were represented. There was also a document provided to you guys that explained the basis of each slope. So we were hoping to clarify some of the slopes that were presented to you and how they apply and don't apply to our project. The first two are in this document. This is what you guys saw at last hearing. In this document, the first two relate to ADA compliant slopes. We presented to you back in November a letter from the architect that explains that because this project is a single or duplex residential unit development, that the Mass Architectural Access Board, the ADA, and the Fair Housing Act do not take jurisdiction over this project. Therefore, we comply with state and federal regulations. There are a lot of slopes that do comply with ADA on site, including some parking, majority of the roadway. We don't actually need to comply with those specific regulations stated in this document. The 10% maximum slope for the subdivision roadway, this is accurate. The Hamilton subdivision bylaw does have a 10% maximum slope for public roadways, and the roadways on this site are 10% or less. However, as you know, we are not a subdivision nor are we a public roadway. So this regulation really does not apply to this project. In regards to the 18% slope, it references here, this was taken from Mass DEP, and it references that the 18% slope is the definition of a steep slope. We researched the Hamilton regulations. We could not find a definition of the steep slopes. We also researched Mass DEP, the stormwater regulations, as well as the erosion control guidelines. And we're also not able to find the definition of a steep slope. Mass guidelines, so because of that, the 18% slope is somewhat misleading. It's also very inaccurate. There really is no definition of a steep slope. It is surely not 18%. We also researched the regulations to find that nowhere does it say in Hamilton or Mass DEP that you cannot work in the land of any percent slopes. So we also found that very interesting. The two slopes at the end here, the maximum slope for mobile lawn and the maximum slope for structural reinforcement. The 3-to-1 slope, it is somewhat challenging to mow a 3-to-1 slope, but there are other mechanical equipment to keep a 3-to-1 slope maintained. It doesn't necessarily need to be a riding lawnmower. And a 2-to-1 slope, anything steeper than a 2-to-1 slope, there should be some reinforcement. However, the project doesn't have anything steeper than a 2-to-1 slope. So this component really doesn't apply to the project. Also, in our plan set, you will find a fairly robust erosion control plan that has erosion control blankets, silt socks, everything to prevent erosion for proposed grades. The existing grades remain stable. Most of the guidelines that we prepare and the guidelines that relate to Mass DEP are for proposed slopes, not existing slopes. So in conclusion, some of the slopes referenced in this document really don't apply to the project. We don't need to comply with ADA. We're not proposing a subdivision roadway that is public, and the 18% slope is not the definition of a steep slope. With that, I'll hand it back over to you, Jill.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I also want to actually bring in one more person, and I think Mr. Effett, I don't believe he is part of the participant. It's Bill Fleming, our landscape architect, because if you remember, well, I know the board remembers. So during one of our many hearings, and Mr. Wheaton, I distinctly remember you saying, look at, we don't have blue spruce on this hill. We have, Fraser fir or some sort of a fir. And I went back to the landscape architect and basically, I think it might have been Mr. Dahlquist as well. Went back to the landscape architect and I asked him, naturalize the area, show a landscape plan that is going to blend in with the surroundings. Don't show, ornamental grasses, show barberry, bearberry, what have you. And Mr. Fleming actually went back. Not only did he add buffer, so wherever we have an impact, where we actually, I'm going to show you, wherever we have an impact and wherever we end up, I'm trying to share my screen. I apologize. It's taking me some effort. I can't pat my belly and rub my head at the same time. Okay, so here is the plan. So anytime we have the project extending towards a boundary line, whether it's open space and not a residence or not, we tried to supplement that line. So you'll notice that what Mr. Fleming had done was go back in and, for lack of a better term, attempt to reforest. So yes, look at this project does have an impact, okay? All development has an impact, but the special permit process gives this board the power to balance that process. So by permitting projects such as this to come in, what you do is you allow and are given control over many aspects of a project that otherwise you aren't. So for example, if this project were to be an A&R plan or something of that venue, people can do anything they want relative to the sloping topography, the forest land, the ledge, what have you. But this vehicle gives you the ability to work with us to develop a better plan. to ensure that we have screening along the front, to ensure that we don't remove some aspects of ledge that are visible from the public ways. And that's what we've done for you. We have tried to work with you because, as you had said, again, during your last hearing, the point of this process is to work collectively to form the best project that we can based on the needs of the owner, the needs of the developer, and the needs of the town. And we address that by going through this process and working through. And this particular plan, I believe, is recognition of this board's efforts and an identification of the developer's willingness to actually do a project and complete a project that is cohesive with the town, that respects the resources of the town. Based on the changes we made, we were actually able to reduce the impervious areas to below 6 acres. We were actually able to reduce the development area, not by huge amounts, but it's now 15, we reduced it by over half an acre of land. So we have condensed it even more. And we've provided a tremendous amount of open space area that this board is going to be able to ensure will be preserved in perpetuity, because the conservation restriction that we are proposing and that we submitted along with our initial application is such a restriction that we cannot change, nor can anyone else, other than going before the legislature and getting it changed. So you as a board will be supporting what your master plan said, because I believe I did submit that to you, where there was an identification of this particular site as being one of the better sites for cluster development for the purpose of preservation, because the forefathers, and I think a couple of you may have even sat on that board, recognized that in order to save the resources existing on this site, that it needed to be subjected to a special permit process instead of a traditional by right process. And at this point, Bill, if you wouldn't mind, I just would like you just to explain your thoughts relative to your landscaping, and just noting as well that all of the rain gardens are going to be supplemented, and we're going to submit an additional plan at the next hearing for those plantings. But if you can, just address the reforestation that you're proposing.
Jill, may I interrupt you for just a moment?
Most certainly, Mr. Boroff.
Okay, I want to compliment you on what you're doing. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is you're always willing to try and work with whatever the board wants or whatever the board is looking for, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bill, want to take it over? If I'm sharing my screen. If you prefer to share yours, I can relinquish.
No, I'm good with the technology and letting you handle that, Jill.
I get you.
My name's Bill Fleming. I'm from William Fleming Associates. We were asked from the last time we met to kind of make the entry into the site off of Tobacco Road a little bit more naturalistic and more native to the surrounding context and the environment, which I think we have. We don't have any signage. We don't have any walls. We don't have any site identification features that are at the entrance besides this new naturalistic buffer that we're planting to obviously amend that view into the site, that 250 foot area, and condense that viewscape in, which we're using a lot of native plant materials, red maples, sugar maples. We are using, instead of the eastern white pine, we're using a columnar white pine, so that the older white pines tend to lose their branches. The columnar ones tend to keep their lower branches throughout maturity, giving that visual buffer from once it's planted until later on in life. And I think we've got a good mix up in front of deciduous and evergreen to eventually, blend into the naturalistic buffers on both sides of the entrance way. And I think, with how we've situated the units now, I think the entrance is going to be quite beautiful.
What kind of white pines did you say they were? I didn't get the first word.
So
Please.
they're actually, it's Pinus strobus fastigiata. It's the.
No, not that part, the English part.
Yeah,
You said
so
something white pine.
I use columnar. I was mistaken. It's the fastigiata, which is another word for columnar. But basically, it's when you see mature white pines, they have a tendency to lose their lower limbs.
Yes, I've seen that.
You know, and when in a buffer kind of situation for screening purposes and to hide buildings and things like that and to blend in, to me, those lower branches are needed, especially when we're trying to recreate undergrowth and have lighting come in for the rain gardens and all the different seed mixes that we're having in that entryway.
So the first word is columnar as in column?
Yeah, but it's I misspoke. It's fastigiata, white
Yeah.
pine.
Yeah. I was
But
just
it's
trying to make
spelled
sure I
by
understood
columnar.
what you were saying. Thank you.
Yep.
And so what I did do is blow up the plant material list. So just on the front portion and then all the buffer areas, we are proposing to plant 175 trees in the area that are evergreen. And then we're proposing to plant 190 ornamental trees. That's in addition to shrubs and perennials and other things. But as you can see from this list, we have offered more of a diverse planting. You know, as Bill said, the Fastiget white pine they're a beautiful tree. They actually hold the limbs at the bottom. Many of my neighbors have them in my subdivision, and they kind of grow up and they don't lose or become wispy, right, Bill? They don't become wispy like a traditional white
Good
pine
job.
can, but they'll still blend because there's so many white pines on this property. But Bill thought it was going to be better to blend that with the hemlock and the spruce and other eastern white pines so that you're going to get a good variation that'll look natural. So I just blew this up so everybody could see it because you can see the variant in sizes as well. So we're proposing some 8 to 10 foot trees, but we're also proposing some 14 to 16 and some 12 to 14 foot trees on the site. So that's that plan. I also do want to point out for the board that as you can see on this particular plan, we have eliminated all those, all the fencing. What we didn't show yet, but what we are considering doing as a low impact development technique is there are these parking spaces at the very front. I'm going to point, so if I annotate, you can see them better. We have these parking spaces right here in front. We're proposing potentially to make those gravel. One of the reasons is because that's going to be the entrance. While it'll be available for the entire community to use, making that gravel would honestly just provide more low impact development. It's adjacent to the stormwater basin. It's adjacent to where the trail will be. And it would make sense to do that. As you can see where the trailhead, i.e. the beginning of the trail on this particular property, we're proposing cedar post trail entrances. So basically when you get there, you know, there'll be a cedar post to tell you, okay, here's the beginning of the trail. And then as it goes back, there'll be signs along the way, just showing where the trail will go. Not frequently, but every once in a while you'll see something. And then the trails will meander back. As we said before, and we presented in our memorandum to our application, those trails will be meandering. We will not disturb any vegetation in order to maintain those trails. They will go around trees or they will be part of the existing trail system that already goes around. And I think most of the board members have actually walked many of those trails with us during our site visit. As I said, some of it is an existing extension of trails that are out there now, but as we had discussed, will finally become public and then open to everyone to use. And that you can see where the trail goes, the trail map goes around the site. I shouldn't say trail map, the trail goes around the site and then circumvents the whole property. You can circumnavigates, I should say, comes around, crosses over, and then connects to another trail that actually exists on an adjacent property and then just comes through. So the entire trail system is looped. So if somebody wanted to go on and, you know, do 1 or 2 full loops, they could do so on this particular property. Oh, what I did want to point out is, and I had talked about it before, is you can see that we are actually, and because I have my annotation up, I can show you, we are actually proposing to vegetate even more heavily in this area. This area is going to be graded somewhat, but once we finish grading, we want it to become more naturalized. So there will be a tree buffer put in, and then it will not be able to be disturbed. That's what this line here designates. That's going to be the end of the, for lack of a better term, the backyard for these specific units. Okay, I'm gonna
quick question for Mr. Fleming.
Please, Bill.
Bill, can you tell us a little bit about what the restoration mix is that you're proposing to use in the crosshatched areas?
Well, I believe that those are going to end up being rain gardens, which we are having.
Right.
Those plans are in work right now, and will be presented at the, I believe, the next meeting, Jill.
Yes, we are actually going to supplement them. Right now, we just have it proposed as a mix, but we really would like to vegetate more heavily. And with discussions with Mr. Fleming, as well as Greg Hockmuth, who's our wetland biologist, and he does design rain gardens, they're coming up with an improved plan that just won't have that woody mix, but will have variant species, including, you know, some trees and a lot of plantings along the slopes. And we just couldn't get that to you for this evening's meeting because of Greg's schedule, but we will have that for the next meeting. But those are for all of the rain gardens. And those are the areas you spoke about, Mr. Ruffett, and I can point them out for the board. Oops, I keep hitting annotate and then unannotating for some reason. So this is a rain garden. Uh-oh, Brent, I might need your help. This is a rain garden. It's really odd. You can't move your screen when you're in rain garden mode. This is a rain garden, and this is a rain garden.
Yeah,
and then I think there's a couple more as well. So those will have supplemented plans with extensive plantings.
That's a very important low impact development technique that, you know, it's clear the project uses it in multiple locations, which fits the tenor of the site, fits the topography of the site. So I think that's nicely used. I also think, you know, in my mind's eye, the new entry area is going to be very similar to a lot of the entries to other private properties along Chabaco Road.
Yeah, that was the intent, to try and model after what is existing along Chabaco presently. And then, if I may, Mr. Ruffett, I'm going to then now present to you some information relative to low impact development, because I think that's really important, because I know it had been discussed and people were curious as to how we were going to satisfy those elements. So what I had done was provide to the board a list of what the LID handbook compliance suggests as low impact development techniques. And we hit, I think, all but 3 of them. So low impact development, I mean, let's face it, what does that even mean, right? Okay, low impact development means you're going to be environmentally, you know, respectful. It doesn't mean you're not going to do a project. It doesn't mean you're not going to develop. It doesn't mean you're going to leave things, you know, completely in their current state. It means you're going to be very respectful of the property and do as minimal amount of disturbance as you can within the confines of providing safe and adequate access to people who are otherwise going to be living at the property. So what we did is we reduced roadway lengths. You know, the roadway has been shortened as much as practical. And the reason you do that is you, again, with a cluster, you have all of your units tight. Instead of having a subdivision with roadways that will go out, go across, which we had shown you in the conventional plan, you do a plan like this. And you provide safety by providing a looped road. So you don't have the element of, oh my gosh, what happens if people can't get out because the road's too long? You have to handle that in some fashion, but by condensing, for lack of a better term, clustering the units, you address the roadway reduction. Reduce parking lot impervious areas. You know, large parking areas have been avoided. The last thing people want to do, and what is now the current style of parking, is to try and have it more spread out. So don't have 50 parking space lots, you know, try and do it so that you have 6 and make sure they're in a fashion where you can kind of screen them with regard to overhead screening trees, because what does that do? Again, it's about environment, it's about heat. So by providing those types of trees, by minimizing a large area of hot top, that's what you do. So we've avoided large parking areas and provided, you know, maybe 6 spaces in a row. Reduce paved rights of way. We've addressed that. Actually, after the board's last meeting, and again, I think it was, I can't remember which board member said it. Mr. Boroff, one of the board members had said, you know, look at the right of way, you know, do something, you know, make it more, make it less impactful. So we actually went back, redesigned, met with the fire department, and in conjunction with them, reduced the pavement width to 22 feet. And that was, in the opinion of the fire department, sufficient width to provide safe and adequate access to the homes. That the cul-de-sac we minimized to only a 20-foot cul-de-sac paved width. Again, it was sufficient to allow the fire department to have single turn movement to get a fire truck in and out. So he signed off, and I did include his, the fire chief's email correspondence confirming that 22 feet was safe and would allow us, again, to reduce paved rights of way. Again, a consistent low impact development technique. And that's the roadway width as well. So use natural stormwater treatment. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Mr. Reffett already noted it. Rain gardens and infiltration ponds are a very important low impact development. And we have all of our basins are actually rain gardens. Disconnect rooftop runoff. What does that mean? That just means don't let it free flow. Actually pipe it into the rain gardens, collect it, treat it before you discharge it. You know, make it so that you're trying to ensure that impacts to stormwater systems, impacts to abutters, impacts to the environment are minimized. And that's what we did with regard to how we manage rooftop runoff. And then there's what's non-rooftop runoff, right? That's just for all of the other impervious areas of the site. You know, you need to make sure you treat it before you discharge it. And we have done that. We have complied completely with stormwater management, and through our correspondence and back and forth with TEC have confirmed that we meet all of the stormwater management guidelines for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as the applicable local regulations relative to stormwater. You know, minimize clearing of native vegetation. I mean, I think we've done that. It's a 66-acre site. About 9.4 of it is in lot 1. So that was, you know, part and parcel, the farm, that's excluded. We have 56 acres of land that basically is part of this development. Out of that 56 acres of land, we're concentrating the entire development on 15.9 acres. And by the way, not all of that is impervious. Less than 6 acres of that is impervious. Less than 28% of lot 1 is even being developed. And, you know, only 10% of that is even having impervious areas. If you will, if you go around and you looked at all of the communities and you looked at individual lots, I would say that we have less burden than a traditional home in the town of Hamilton. Environmentally sensitive development. I will say to you that this project is, you know, this land is beautiful. It really is. And we are respecting that. And that's why we're proposing this as a senior housing development and not another form of development over which the board would have little to no impact and no input. the project meets and preserves 100-foot wetland buffer areas. That was something we had discussed with the board when we met back in November of 2020, and then again in March or April of 2021. You know, we opted to preserve the entire 100-foot buffer. In no instance do we invade that except for a temporary crossing in order to get to the septic system, which again is on upland. You know, how is this environmentally sensitive? Some people would say because we're coming in and we're taking down slopes and we're taking down trees. Again, it's a balancing. All development has impact. It's about balancing the impact. It's about looking at the site and assessing what benefit will this town receive as a result of this cluster development. What the town will receive are 41 acres of open space only on lot 1. And it will receive 9.4 acres of preserved farmland that will also be a part of that conservation restriction. So if for some reason the farm were to go out of existence, then that land does not become available for development, but rather is continuously subjected to that conservation restriction, which would mean it becomes passive recreation. So this site is being developed in an environmentally sensitive way, which again, all of these components, all of these characteristics, all of these, if you will, not regulations, but compliance suggestions have been met by the development. So I believe that we have, in fact, provided to this community a low impact development. I'm going to go back. Oops, sorry.
Jill, can I ask a couple questions?
Oh, most certainly, please.
How do you discharge and recharge water runoff?
Sure. I am going to let you speak to Mr. Cole because Brent Cole knows better than I. So Brent, do you want to just answer Mr. Boroff's comment relative to treatment of storm?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Boroff, do you mind repeating your question?
Yeah, how do you discharge and recharge water? How do you physically do that?
So the stormwater ponds collect the stormwater from the site, and then through outlet structures, they discharge stormwater at a rate that allows us to control to make sure that we're not increasing the post-development flows. That's in terms of discharge. In order to recharge the stormwater and introduce stormwater back into the groundwater, it goes through a treatment system, and then it's allowed to infiltrate in the rain gardens as well as the infiltration ponds. So you won't see as much discharge in the rain gardens or the infiltration ponds, at least for the ones that allow for the stormwater to infiltrate back into the ground once treated.
Okay, thank you.
So at this point, I mean, I have gone through all of our various, I'm going to highlight on this. I've gone through all of our various resubmittals. I think that it's probably a lot of information for the board. I mean, I will add that I noted during the prior hearing that there was some discussion relative to the local preference plans and the condominium documents, et cetera. All of those were submitted with the application, including the local preference plan that was approved when we did the Canterbrook project. So that is what you have traditionally required, and that is what we were subjecting ourselves to, as well as the CR, which is a document that is controlled by the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. It has nothing to do with what I would like to see in it. It has everything to do with what the government would like to see in conservation restrictions. And then relative to the condominium documents, I mean, those are the condominium documents, and you can't really finalize them until this board issues a decision, and then you import a lot of those conditions into the decision, which you can condition. So I just would add that those are all part of your initial submittal packages and are in or should be in some folder that you might have relative to the application. And then, what I did notice that there was a question relative to the board's determination about applicable building design standards and PB rules and regs. It occurred to me that it's possible that the board didn't have in its possession that particular document. It's actually part of your special permit design requirements, and we've complied with all of those. They're set forth in, I'm just flipping to the page, it's called Rules and Regulations Governing Special Permits, and there's a specific section just for senior housing. It was enacted in 2009, and we do comply with that, and I can redistribute it to the board so that you can have it. But it basically outlines what you have to do for open space, farmland, and then senior housing. So I know there was a question mark in your sheet, and I just wanted to make sure I addressed that for you. At this point, if I may, Mr. Mitchell.
I would love to address some questions while we have the.
Oh, please, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Mr. Wheaton.
Before we go down that road,
Okay.
yeah, just want to again set the parameters. Thank you, Jill, for that presentation. We did go over, but it was a lot to be presented. So now we go into the section where the board will discuss this. We'll obviously have questions. We'll try and keep that, in the 30-minute range. We can do that. That would be great. If we need to extend it, we will, but we want to be respectful of having some time for comments by participants and the public. Go ahead, Bill.
Thanks, Rick. I would like to share my screen so I can go over these landscaped plans with my own cursor and ask questions. It's going to be a little difficult if I don't
I
share
shut
my
it off,
screen.
Mr. Wheaton, so.
And I will put up the same diagram that Attorney Mann had.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so here, can everybody see the same diagram?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to say that I think the developers did quite a nice job in attempting to leave a lot of the ledge that already exists in the area here where my cursor is. I think that's a fair assessment. And that definitely contributes to the low impact character of it. But the issue I have, or the question I have, is in this site, you have the wetlands in this area, and then you have this buffer zone, which the plan identifies. It's this area right in here, and then down here, and then down here. And what I'd like to know is what's in that buffer zone now? It's a little hard to tell when you're standing out here on the street and you see this huge forest of spruce trees here that has existed for hundreds of years. And you know that a lot of those trees are coming down in this project. Blasting is inevitable. You can't build on this site without blasting. And you're going to have to remove a large share of those trees. And so my question is, are any of those trees in the buffer zone here? Or in fact, is the project going to more or less completely remove that forest and not, leave any of the old growth here, because the old growth isn't here. The old growth is right on top of the ledge right in this area. So perhaps the landscape designer can say, in this buffer zone, is there just some short deciduous trees, or in fact, do some of the mature spruce trees still exist in this buffer zone, which will help screen the project from, being visible along Asbury Street and along, Tobacco Street and along Route 22. So, is this project able to preserve any of that old growth forest, or is basically it all going to go and be replanted in this area? That would be my question, and my compliment is that I think they made a really good start on this, preserving the screen and trying to screen the development from Tobacco Road. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it okay, Mr. Mitchell, if we respond so that the board members get an answer to the questions?
Sure.
Okay, so as far as the areas, Mr. Wheaton, within the buffer, we're not touching them, and they consist of the same type of growth as the areas outside the 100-foot buffer. So you have many large.
That is not answering my question. My question is, does the area in the buffer zone contain any of the old growth trees, or is it just, bushes and short deciduous shrubs as you rise up from the wetlands.
The answer is yes, it does.
It does.
Contain old growth,
Could we-
large spruce trees. I think Brent could actually show you a picture because the 100-foot buffer does have those. So Brent, I don't see, oh, there you are. Do we have that aerial shot? So the buffer area is, has many old growth trees. It is not simply scrubby brush. Remember that?
That would be very
helpful.
to see.
And we actually showed like an area where we cut out the development area. Remember, Brent and Jeff? I can find it too. I can probably look.
Yeah,
in
I
there.
do. Give me
Okay.
1 second.
So, Mr. Wheaton, that's an excellent question because, you know, a lot of people wonder, are we really just deforesting and, you know, we're saving buffer and that has nothing in it? But no, that's not the case. As a matter of fact, many of these wetlands even have growth in them. It just so happens that there's, you know, soils characteristic of wetland, which means there's standing water at times, but not sufficient to eat up the trees. Like the vernal ponds, obviously, there's no heavy growth in them, although sometimes there'll be 1 or 2 trees, but around it, they'll be heavily treed. And that's important too, because as you know, right, by maintaining that buffer, that 100-foot and those mature tree growths, you preserve the actual wetland by protecting them from, you know, any type of I guess, environmental burdens, right? So 100-foot of buffer is actually great for the wetland to preserve that resource. So you guys have that?
I think, and I think Bill's question, if I interpreted it correctly, is will this project, once built, be visible from Essex Street?
Absolutely not, no. And we showed that in one of the site renderings. It's literally impossible. And we can show, and we actually had a presentation of that when we had given, I'm trying to find that in one of the presentations, and I'm going to get that. So we had a cross section of the site. And I apologize, I just have to find it because we had presented it before. So you'd think it'd be at my fingertips, but nothing is ever at my fingertips. Cross section, no, that's the wrong one. So Brent, you guys know the plans I want to show is the one where we have the aerial photograph, and then we show
Where we show our Jill, do we show our development on it as well?
Yep.
Is it this one here, Jill?
Oops. Here we go. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so Mr. Wheaton, the green, I'm going to just annotate. I think, Mr. Wheaton, if you wanted to annotate, you can too. Can he or no? Because you're sharing. No. All right. So you see that.
That's very, very informative. This is an aerial photograph with the development superimposed.
Yes. And this is
That's
the old.
that is a very informative photograph. That's very good.
And you know what? The next time I present to you, Mr. Wheaton, we'll superimpose the current design on it, because that we just can literally lift
Right.
and put on.
Up at the entrance, you haven't got the reduced.
Yeah, this is
And we'll do that for you because it is telling, but you can see all the trees and the mature vegetation.
Yep. That's very, very clear. That's very good. That's very, very, very informative. Yes. You should have showed that. You should have showed that the first day. If you want
I'm sorry.
my opinion, you should have showed that the first day.
Well, we did show it. We did show it on 1019 is what I'm looking at.
Hey, Bill, I think you can still get lost up there.
Well, that was
All right. So we've answered Bill's question. Want to move on to other board members who have questions to ask to Bill? Jill, I have something I'd like to see at some point, if you can produce an artist rendering of the new entranceway, because all we've seen is the old entranceway, and that's the one that caused a lot of comment about how it wasn't respectful of the neighborhood. You've made a significant change to that entranceway by preserving, it looks looks like, as Bill commented, a lot of the ledge, and pushed back the actual houses by 250 feet. So it would just be helpful, I think, for me, the board, and the public to get a visual rendering of what that will appear like.
So what I can do is take the renderings that we have and actually update them using a different approach, because when we had actually created those 3D, what do they call, cross sections? I can't remember. Mr. Dahlquist or Mr. Poor would know there was some terminology for it, but when we proposed those, we had to have an architect and engineer do it, but I can update one of them to simply remove those, believe it or not, the first 2 units that you saw, but then the 3rd unit was moved. That's how we got that 250 feet from the center line of Chabaco, that clear spot. So I can try and give you some sort of a visual. Yep.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a drive-by. You know, if you were walking by or driving by, what would you see now, given the new design of the entrance?
I mean, if you're standing right at the center of the roadway, you're going to see the roadway, and you possibly can see a peak of one of the homes.
No, I get it. Yeah.
And that'll be good, because you know what? By the time I give you that, I'm going to have my my rain gardens fully developed, and then I can show that too. So, okay.
I mean, I think that's the big impact from this redesign, is that it changes completely what the entrance potentially look like. So while we can see it on a, in a 2D fashion, I'd like to see it from, the roadway and a person looking in.
Yeah, I actually can commission for having a 3D rendering, like literally an artist will come out, look at that original cross section, look at Bill's changes, and then show you what it will look like.
Thank you.
Of course.
I can't believe that Amal or Jonathan don't have questions here.
Oh,
Amal,
Mr. Dahlquist is muted.
You're muted.
You might also not believe I have a question, Rick.
Pat, do you have a question?
All right, Patrick, why don't you go first?
You mind if I just add, is a quick one?
That's fine.
Just, it was actually, I wasn't around in the pre-application process, and referring back to the memo that was sent for this meeting, it was actually the first time I saw the original in Exhibit 1. Actually, I could probably share my screen, I suppose. Just quick. Share that. So is this the correct site plan is shown for the original pre-application process?
Yes.
Yeah. And I guess I looked at that in reference to what's being proposed now, and I can't recall a conversation of why the plan had changed in what, I guess, and maybe there's an opportunity just to quickly explain why. I saw this as maybe a bit more open space allowed and less impervious surface while achieving kind of the same amount of homes. I didn't know if it was because of the phasing plan or whatnot, but that was.
So believe it or not, it's the same exact amount of development area. The issue is, so okay, I can annotate. I can annotate on your plan. Oh, no, oops.
Or if you have the original, I think.
Can you put those 2 plans together, Mr. Nolan? And I can show you exactly why. There you go. Awesome. Oh. There you go. Okay, so if you want, I can share too. I don't mean to burden you with it, but so in this area right here, right now, oh, I can't. You know what? Do you mind if you stop sharing and let me, and then I can move better? Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Let's do this. Here we go. Thank you. Okay, materials for 10/19. I went January 4th, share screen. Okay, so here's the pre-app site concept. Okay, so this is small. I'm going to make it, and then I'm going to open. I can open this and just go to this view, and then do new view, new window. Okay, here we go. I'm sorry it's taking me a while. I am not as good at that as you are, Mr. Nolan. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so there we go. So here are the two plans. The actual development area is the same size. The issue with the old design, if you will, for lack of a better term, is this area right here, is this area right here. And as you can see, I don't know if that, I have to be honest with you, I can't recall if that was certified as a vernal pool or we just accepted it as a vernal pool. So that is completely verboten, 100 feet from it. So this plan, the plan, if you will, that we had submitted originally, was actually somewhat more impactful to the environment because it had some issues with regard to the vernal pool. Now, we could have circumvented it and kind of skirted around the outsides of it and made the roadway go around, but you really couldn't do that comfortably. And it is best to stay away from that vernal pond. And that's literally why the design changed. But the actual footprint, because this area where the pond is being preserved, as is the buffer around it. And that's why. So the area actually consumes the exact same amount. It just looks different because you don't have the driveways drawn in. You just don't have the stormwater drawn in. You know, you don't have those features, and that's why it doesn't look as impactful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, it does. Thank you.
Of course.
The other notable
question.
thing, it appears that original design included only duplexes.
We did only have duplexes in this one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't, we vary sometimes. I mean, yes, it did. It only had duplexes. I think there are, I don't remember how many singles are there anymore. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there are 7 singles now.
I counted 8.
Is there 8 now? You know what, I'm doing it so quick, Miss Crouch, I can't, I don't want to make a representation, I think, that's why. Okay, so I defer to you, it could be 8. We had reduced the number of single family homes when we actually relocated the front units. And made the units, a few of the units smaller. So also the difference is we've actually properly sized the units on the plan we proposed and had smaller unit sizes as well.
So you basically brought them further away from the entrance. when you
Oh,
did
yeah,
that.
of course,
Yeah.
yeah. We did that, and then obviously we preserved the area around the vernal pool, that habitat, which you can see. And then you don't see all the storm water, so that kind of impacts, you have proposed locations, but who knows?
So other questions from the board? Emil, you were going to ask a question.
Would you like me to stop sharing, Mr. Dahlquist, so you can?
Would like you to stop hearing. Is that what you said?
Sharing my screen?
Oh, sure.
Sharing.
Yes, please. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I wanted to, when we had put together the checklist, for example, a short time ago, and with the idea coming up with a couple of basic items to discuss on this project, because what we want to do is begin at the beginning, which means as the designer, Ms. Mann, what your design team would have gone through from the beginning and how it was that you would make your decisions as you went through the entire process. And so that is, that's also what one of the bylaws says. Step number one is to do that site features map. And that is the reason that we were looking for that particular drawing, which I had not seen before. And maybe it was part of the pre-application, I don't know, but I was not there then. But the, so that's where I would like to start. And I have to say that I feel pretty unsatisfied with the way the steep slopes were kind of dismissed pretty casually, giving it no bearing in terms of what is a steep slope and so forth. And I'm going to research again. I don't have the stormwater book with me, but it does specifically state the 18% in that as a steep slope. So there is a definition for it. Anybody who's done subdivision work knows what steep slopes are and they know what the number is. anyway, but I'd like to go back to that site features map and Patrick Raffett, do you have that sketch that I gave you on that? Can you put that up on your screen?
Patrick, you're
You're
muted.
mute, yeah, he's
Pat,
unmuted.
can you bring that up? I had sent that to you about 5 today, I think.
Who did you send it to?
Yeah, 1 second.
I think he said he sent it to Emil.
It was a site features map, Pat.
Emil, I think he said he sent it to you. Did you check your emails? Did you receive it?
Richard,
I'm sorry.
We're good.
Yeah, I'm looking, but
If you, I mean, I can.
Jill, do
find
you have
stuff.
that?
Are you talking about your, I mean.
Yeah, it's the sketch. There it is. Okay. Yeah, thank you
have
very
it?
much.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, the reason this is something that I started just for my own edification, actually, thinking, well, I need to understand what is actually going on in this site in order to make any kind of analysis of what is the merits of the project and how does it compare with sort of best management practices going forward. So I started on the sketch. I just thought I would share it with everybody because I think for me anyway, it was meaningful and it was just done in pencil. I took the information from your, I think 30 or 40 scale site plans and pieced them together and then plotted it out at 100 scale so it matches your plan. Tobacco Road is up at the top, so it conforms, it's oriented the same way. But what this showed me when I looked at it is the sensitivity on the site. The dark blue is the wetlands area. The buffers are the lighter blue color. And the reddish area, there are what's everything above 18% slope. And again, what this also says to me, there are a couple of overlapping areas. If you look along the southern or lower part of the drawing, you see some overlapping between the red and the blue. That's an area where you have steep slopes dropping right down to a wetlands. So you see that anything that happens on the top of that hill, we have to be careful what happens in that particular area because it drops right down into the wetlands area. There's some other overlapping as well in a couple of other areas. Yep, right there. That's just, again, and you have one building. Now these may have shifted. This was the original layout of the building. So I know this has changed a bit, but that particular building is right on a buffer area and a steep slope right down to into a wetlands area. But when I looked at that, then what a designer would do, well, what does this particular sensitivity say to somebody looking at designing that to do an environmentally sensitive site? So we have the site features, again, are the wetlands. There's an aquifer there, the overlapping steep slopes and so forth. Well, how would this site then become vulnerable with respect to steep slopes? Well, the potential could be for pollution into the wetlands area or into the aquifer. Stormwater runoff is another thing that we have to be careful of. Erosion and sedimentation is another big one, given the steep slopes. And the steep slopes, again, on your plan are 2-to-1, which just accelerates the erosion there. And then the fourth one is kind of pedestrian safety in on some of these slopes with people living in some of these units, even walking around their buildings. It could be a potential problem. The second step is, where's the project going to be located? Now, I didn't locate that as you did on your site plan, but it pretty much is the edge of the buffers. So if you look at the edge of all the blue lines on this on this drawing, yeah, not that plan. It's that's Jonathan's plan.
That plan shows it.
Yeah, that's Jonathan's plan, and he can explain that in a minute. Well, Jonathan, do you want to explain that particular one right now?
Everybody hear me?
That's the forest resource map.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the reason I brought this up is because the buffer zone is pretty much this, you can see the edge of the yellow hatching is the buffer zone. So this is all buffer zone here. And the edge of the forest is cut right to the buffer zone. So this is another way of looking at this is everything that is teal here. So these are forests that are preserved that aren't in the buffer. Everything that's yellow here, all these, that's forest that's preserved in the buffer zone. And so the development area is pretty much pushed right to the edge of the buffer zone everywhere. And then along here, it's pushed to the edge of the lot line into the 25-foot vegetative setback requirement, same here. And it's right against the buffer zone here, and it's pretty much against it here. And then this is the portion they just are proposing to put back, this little hatched area. This is the area that was previously removed and now it's put back. So essentially what this drawing is showing is that the areas of forest that aren't in the buffer zone, and in a sense aren't already protected, going back to unprotected conservation areas, are these teal areas. So this one's pretty much inaccessible. This is sort of inaccessible over by the septic field. This one's inaccessible across this sort of ravine here. This one's tucked behind the wetland here. I believe this is a wetland. This is a vernal pool. And then this one's out at the front here. So the rest of the development is pretty much pressed against the buffer. So Emil, does that explain what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, well, the developed part is the white part right in the
Yes.
center. That's uncolored. Yeah, that is the developed zone. Okay, we can go back to the other drawing then. So the second step then is identify, well, where would the project be located in the development area? What was chosen here, where you ultimately put the buildings, was that area right in the center. And what it indicates is that the buildings were actually placed on a lot of the very sensitive areas, a lot of the steep slopes. And again, in the bylaws where it says to the maximum extent feasible, it doesn't say you can't, but it said to the maximum extent feasible, proposed development area shall consist of land outside the identified conservation areas, which do include the steep slope.
Where is that?
Where's what?
That provision that says you'll be outside I just don't know where that is.
8.1.12 point
Okay.
1 or 2.
Okay.
So then we look at what are the LID goals for a site. This is even before you have the houses, but we know where the development area is now. It says avoid if possible or wherever feasible. So that's placed there now, and that's really a choice. That sort of you need to kind of examine why did you pick this particular place? Well, you did because everything else is protected, and this is an unprotected zone. It's a conservation area, but it is legally unprotected. So that's where this project is going. So you look at what the LID goals are for a site plan on a sensitive site like this. And first it says, this comes from the handbook, it says avoid impacts, preserve natural features, and use conservation design techniques, which we'll talk about a little later. Reduce impacts, reduce impervious cover, manage impacts, utilize natural features and natural low impact techniques to manage stormwater. So what the designer is looking at now is how can I introduce LID into this project where it's going to be in a very sensitive zone and do it, effectively. And a lot of the stormwater says the best thing to do is make some hybrid combination of natural stormwater runoff as well as pipes and basins. And we know in your drawings that it's completely pipes and basins that is going to be used for the stormwater. So you look at this and then you say, well, what are the variables that you have to deal with in a plan like this? Well, one of them is the number of dwellings. There are 50 here, 50 individual dwelling units. That was something that apparently was a given at the beginning because it's what you could do here on the site. But then the second one was the type of housing, what choices you had once you decide 50 units is the one you're going to do. And this is where I think I would kind of question, was there any thought given to a different form of housing, such as maybe fewer larger buildings that would incorporate 50 units, or some combination of smaller buildings, much larger building, smaller buildings, where you could maybe even incorporate a communal facility in one of the buildings as a gathering place for the residents on the site. The benefit of doing something like that, where you're using up less of the natural resources here, the steep slopes, is that it's more site sensitive. You could then put a road in, have the same number of units located near the top where you're placing yours, having less site disturbance, less issues that are going to get complicated because the steep slopes are inevitable. That elevation that you have at the top of the hill is going to require, if you're going right to the buffer lines and to build it like this, 2-to-1 slopes going around all sides of that development. That's really a potential problem, I think, on that. And it is a maximum. It is allowable, but it is the maximum allowable in the stormwater runoff. So for me, I think what the decision was, well, this is the kind of housing we do. We do single family housing. And so we're going to put them this way, and we're going to space them no closer than 25 feet because that's what the code says. So that's what happened here. And you just simply decided, apparently, that you're going to deform the top of that hill enough to make these work. And the blasting, if you look at a lot of the topo, you're essentially going to create a series of shelves going up your road. The road is not shown here, of course, but the double loaded corridor, the double loaded road going up, you're going to have to blast shelves in it. Sometimes these houses are 20 to 30 feet higher that are side by side. It's hard to fathom in this particular drawing, but again, we could go back to your site plan, not that one, but your large. You don't have to do it now. You go back to your larger site plan. That's an example where you have these houses that are very close together, steep slopes between them, and they're 20 to 30 feet. They're a roof high difference to adjacent houses. So, low impact, you talked a lot about the low impact development, but the principles really for site design are, this comes from a low impact book, conservation of natural hydrology, trees and vegetation. So it's kind of minimal disturbance on the site. Use the natural hydrology that takes place there. Use micro level controls as opposed to underground piping. That's just a fancy word for saying deal with the runoff locally. Don't transport it as far as you can and dump it into a rain garden. Dispersal of stormwater runoff. Conservation of stream and wetland buffers. Again, highly sensitive site. You have very steep slopes dropping right down to your wetlands area there on the southern part of that slope and in the northwest. That's puzzling. And then the other thing, of course, on this site is the aquifer. Our goal really here, and it's one of the responsibilities we have as a board, and actually responsibility for everybody involved in this process, including Town of Hamilton employees, staff, board members, the public, everybody, is to protect Hamilton's resources, water, and land. And so the water is the critical one here because of the GPOD presence or aquifer presence down at the bottom of the hill. So a good site design practices would be reduce storm pipes, gutters, curbs, reduce building footprints. And again, reducing building footprints could be done with fewer buildings that are larger. You'd have less impervious surface. So that would be an alternative to this particular layout, which is pretty intense on the 50. Another is minimize grading. Well, you have to deal with what you have here, that's for sure. Limit lot disturbance and reduce impervious surfaces. Again, that's the what we just talked about. So looking at the So what this is to me, when I look at that, this is a series of junctures that you reach starting from, okay, we have a site, we have a property line defining a site. We're asking ourselves, what are the site conditions that we have to deal with? So this is the first thing that pops up. Okay, it is a very sensitive site. Some are regulated, some are not, but it's all very sensitive. So that's your second decision. So now you have to decide, well, how much of a conservation subdivision do you really want to build here? In which case you want to minimize disturbance. So again, it was a choice, and the choice went to more buildings spread out across the entire site as the choice that was made to do this project, as opposed to fewer. I mean, I never saw an alternative. I don't know if one was ever offered, but or discussed. But that, for a designer, I think would be kind of a critical juncture to make that decision. The third one is well, okay, we're going to spread the buildings across the site. We're going to have to take down we have to do clear cutting across the entire site and blast as needed to create these series of shelves to support houses that were designed for a flat site. It's puzzling to me why some of those choices are made, but it is something that this board, I think, has to deal with and evaluate at some point. Whether this, to me, the big question is this project ecologically responsible? That's a big issue, I think. And this is about the first topic that we had come. This is the first of 4 that I think we'd like to talk about, or I certainly would. And I'm not going to go on beyond that, but this is the one about the relationship to the natural resources. This is a case where a judgment has to be made. Can you build anything anywhere if you have the technology to do it? Or is there a limit? Is there a capacity? Is this site telling you you should go this far and no further? Or can you say, no, we're going to flatten it and we're going to do whatever we want because look at all of that protected area that you have over there. So I find this one very troubling when I start looking at it from this angle. So I'll stop there because we're kind of running out of time here and let others talk.
So Jill, is there a response there?
Oh,
or-
of course. So, I mean, listen, Mr. Dahlquist, I understand, and I appreciate your sensitivities. Notwithstanding that, your whole process is second guessing that which a duly constituted board already did. The process that you're referring to is a pre-application process. The whole point for us having gone forward, because this is the design that, yes, the developer wanted. I mean, I'm not going to tell you it doesn't. This is the design that it chose. This is the design that it felt protected many of the resources. I understand that you appreciate steep slopes. Neither your bylaw nor none of the stormwater guidance nor any of the documents you're quoting protect steep slopes at 18%. It does not exist as a protective measure. What does exist is a buffer to a wetland. And by the way, the 100 feet are not protected. Under the DEP, I can go right up to the edge if I can prove that what I'm doing won't impact. Under your own bylaw, I can disturb up to 50 feet away and just can build 75 feet away. So we intentionally preserve that. Why? Because that is something that is identified by your Conservation Commission, that is identified in your bylaws. Steep slopes are simply asked to be shown on a project. They are not protected. They are not prohibited from being modified. And in fact, your plan is while I appreciate the effort that went into it, if you don't mind, stop screen sharing. The plan that we presented, that was testimony by the applicant, actually shows the board and shows it, in a fashion, if I may, is non-discriminatory, because it's showing you exactly what the existing conditions are, exactly what the slopes are, exactly what the actual conservation areas are. And you can see across the site where that steep slope is. That's a steep slope. That's with a 40% grade. The 18% slopes, there's nothing to say that they're anything other
Jill,
than an 18% slope.
I can speak further, Jill.
But if I can just finish, because the whole point is we complied with that which your bylaw requires. This board, as well as we, are subject to the four corners of your bylaw. We complied. It's disadvantageous. It's prejudicial to try and reverse the clock. Looking back is not allowed, it's not authorized, and it's not productive. Because
if I may, Jill, let me just respond to that for a minute. Let me just respond to that.
Let her finish.
So when you look at your bylaw, it specifically says you come before a duly constituted board, you present your desired project, and the board says to you, proceed or do not proceed. And the point is not simply that we want to just, do what we want to do. We came before the board, they sanctioned that particular style of development, and we were preserving and told them we preserve farmland, which, by the way, is an exceptionally valuable resource. There's not enough farmland. There's not enough productive land. We preserved all the buffer. And that's what the town said, good, because the secondary purpose is to actually not disadvantage a developer by allowing them to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to this point, to hear that there's slopes that should be protected that are more valuable than any other resource, or that we should alter the types of homes we are put in. That's a discussion that had been undertaken, duly constituted board, and now we're proceeding. And that's why we react to all the positive reinforcement. We react to the comments from board members who say, listen, preserve the viewscape, preserve those areas as much as you can. We left the ledge face and the ledge out on Chabaco. We brought the site in tighter. Relative to low impact development, not all sites can have grass swales along the sides. Sometimes you need to provide mechanical aspects, i.e. pipe, that will bring them to rain gardens. But rain gardens still are a low impact development. I think the whole point here is people need to stop focusing on what could have, should have, would have, and need to look at the site and say, can we make it better? Is this developer going to preserve these other areas? Because once we do this, by the way, we can never touch that 100-foot buffer. That is verboten once this permit is granted. And as far as an alternative plan, yes, you have one. It's in your package. It was the conventional plan. It shows 6 A&R lots that people can come in. I can submit a plan tomorrow, have those lots available, and all those lots can be completely ledge removed and areas taken, deforested, without ever talking to anyone other than the building inspector and the fire department. Mr. Smith specifically said no to that, because every developer tries to do A&R lots in these types of projects to basically absorb the costs of permitting. Mr. Smith said, no, this is what we're doing. No A&R lots, the farmland's preserved. So it's hard to hear what you're saying, because we've worked so hard to make this project good, and we continue to listen to the board. So I would suggest strongly that we actually, make a determination relative to 8.2.5 and 8.1.7 and 8.1.12, because that seems to be critical to your conversation and needs to be a hurdle that is no longer a part of the conversation because it's been complied with. And at that point, Mr. Mitchell, I hand it back to the chair.
No, I'd just like to respond, Mr. Chair, to this briefly. First of all, I didn't say it was protected land. I said from the beginning it's unprotected, steep slopes. But there's a reason they indicate it in the bylaws, a reason in the stormwater and in the LID. There is a reason. And I wasn't trying to go back and undo anything in the pre-application. My effort here is to make a statement about what is the design process when you go through, and what your design team, your decisions that you made ultimately to lead to this final product that you have, that we're being asked now to evaluate. And I think what I was doing is providing a little background as we get deeper into this now. We're going to examine it house by house if we have to on this, and show what is actually going on there. And as we get into it, that's when, you got conceptual approval, that's fine, but that's not an approval. You have to we have to now evaluate the details on this project to a great deal to find out whether it does meet the bylaws. So by going through a pre-app doesn't mean you have approval on this project. You know that, and you shouldn't really try to say, well, that's all been decided. It has not been, and we're going to get into detail. My reason here was to give background to mostly to the board members about how the design process goes and what leads to people making a choice and a decision to produce something. And that was the intent of what I was trying to explain here. So that was it.
And I understand, and by no means do I say, and I said it twice when I was responding to you, that pre-app was anywhere a decision. This process is about working with your bylaw, and your bylaw has
Right.
nothing about preserving slopes, has nothing about not being able to disturb them. And honestly, if we go through all of those criteria, I would love to, because I think that's productive. I think going back in time and doing the analysis that you had done is wonderful, so the board can see the quality. But I think it's almost best to look at what we've presented, because it gives a fairer, more balanced approach to what the property is. You can see it on this plan. It's clear. We're not trying to hide any of it. And
No,
we
I know you're not
presented
trying
it
to
with
hide. Yeah, right.
and I would engage it. I mean, we do want to go through it. We want to give the best project we can, but we want the board to understand that the design and the development area is as shown. We aren't looking to redesign it. We're looking to put in place conditions so that we can make this board feel good about the outcome, because it's a balancing between development, fiscal obligations to the community, and again, your own master plan committee said that this project should be developed as a cluster development. It's one of the sites that has been listed, and the only way to do it is as shown. There's no other way to get into this project except
I
for
guess
the road we show.
I can't let that one stand, because I did go back and look at that housing study. That's the one you're referring to?
Yep, the HPP.
Yeah,
I
and
have
I
it,
went
yeah.
back. I went back and I looked at that, and there was actually there were 60 people in attendance, and this was like a visioning session. 60 people in attendance, and they broke it up into 10 tables, 6 people per table, or 6 tables and 10 people. And one of those 10 tables came up with this idea of none of the other tables did. So essentially, you had 6 or 10 people making that decision about the housing. It was just kind of bizarre.
I mean,
But
this board itself is
Yeah,
comprised of 70
let me have a couple of words on that, Emo. Having been a party to that housing production plan process, I can tell you that many sites were discussed from border to border. One of the big efforts that the authors and participants to that effort made was to focus on properties where there were willing sellers of property, such as this property, and what might potentially take place there. So there was a lot of support for it. It wasn't strange. It wasn't untoward. It was something that was discussed with the Board of Selectmen. The Planning Board approved the HPP as well as the state did. And it also went before the Board of Selectmen as part of their deliberative process, I think on about 3 different occasions. So, and that included looking at individual sites like this. So, one of the important elements as part of a housing production plan is to look at potential areas where development may occur. There are very few properties that were for sale in the town, this being one of them. And that's exactly why it was, it was teed up as a potential for development.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that background, Patrick, but, and I'm not saying you cannot build on the hill. That's not my position at all on this, because you're entitled, the owner is entitled to do that. So This is a matter of how you do it. And again,
Right.
we'll get
I
into
would-
more detail later on that.
I'd like to weigh in on this too.
All right, go
I had
ahead.
the impression, may I, Rick?
Go
May I Go
ahead.
ahead. Okay. The feeling I'm getting from this is that you are asking her and the developer to go back to ground zero and start from scratch. I don't think that's appropriate. They have a plan. We need to work with this plan. And I don't think it's fair at all for us to be asking them to go back and start from scratch. It just.
No,
I'm
I agree
sorry,
with that. I agree with that, Richard, 100%. And that's not what I'm asking her to do.
but it sounds like it.
I don't
that's the
mean to
problem,
sound that
Emil.
way. No.
And it's the other part of the problem is we're getting way into too much micromanagement here. We're
Well-
trying to redo that plan. And I don't think that's appropriate either. That's not our job.
I think for a lot,
for
a lot of us on this project, it's a learning process. We're going through this. We're trying to understand what is the mechanism, what is the procedure you go through in making decisions on it. That's the key. And what are your choices?
I don't agree
and
with
what
you. We don't
basing
make
it-
the decisions like that.
Because in the
We
end,
get to approve the plan. We do not get to make decisions on the plan on how it's done. I think you're overstepping the bounds of this.
no, I'm not,
I'm
I don't want
serious.
to
I think
change
there's a
I'm
serious
not changing
problem here.
anything on the plan. This will be the plan we evaluate. That's all. I understand that, Richard. The point
We're
is,
getting way into it, too much micromanagement, way too much.
Let him finish.
Okay.
Go ahead, Emil.
yeah, the point here is, Richard, we have to evaluate this. We have to make judgments on it that actually are based on a reason that is stipulated in the bylaws. That's the way you make a decision. We have to go back to the bylaws, and that's the reason we went through this whole checklist. What I was doing was just giving a background of what you go through to make a decision, and what is it that triggers that decision that you make to do one thing versus another. There are alternatives to almost everything as you go through this. And if your goal is to preserve as many sensitive areas as possible, like steep slopes, like woodlands, any scenic features, if your goal is to preserve as much of that as possible, then you design that way. If that is not your goal, you don't design that way. So we're now looking at this particular project and now determining, well, what were the decisions made at those key times? I'm not trying to redo anything, not trying to go back and redo the pre-application process. That's done. That's decided. But we now have to make a decision whether this project meets the current bylaws. That's our decision.
Okay,
And that's-
I understand that statement. I
Okay,
don't think that's what we're doing. I think we're trying to redo this plan, and I don't think that's appropriate. And I'm going to stick with that concept, because as a non-developer, that's what it sounds like to me.
well, I appreciate the
Sounds like you're
comments.
micromanaging, and
I do want to hear
I
from,
kind of think I'm right on that one.
I do want to hear from other board members too. I think
That's
it's time for
fine.
the board, time for the board to talk to each other on this project and exchange.
Yeah,
ideas.
Whoa, talk to the board on the side. I'm sorry, I don't understand that statement.
Richard,
I'm sorry, Brick.
could you just let the board talk? Yes, I would like to hear,
I'm
I
just
would like,
concerned that people.
Richard.
Yeah.
I think we got your point of
Okay,
view as
thank you,
well,
Rick. I'm sorry.
well presented. I think it's clear. So I'd like to hear from other board members.
I can try to form an opinion here, or not form it, but explain it. I think that while all points are considered and well considered at that, Emil, the steep slope issue is sort of, I feel like it's stopping us too early, because like the wetland buffer area is what is determined to be necessary to protect the wetlands. And almost in no case does the steep slope overrun the buffer area and into the wetland itself. I think there's a few little nicked corners, and not to make light of them, but I just don't think it's as pervasive of an issue if in fact the buffer area is to be kept so that water runoff is managed. And I say it that way to indicate, you know, we're stopping too early on the point. You know, we need to maybe get to the wastewater management to ensure that, you know, while it is close thresholds we're dealing with, and therefore as sensitive as you're trying to make it out to be, that there's maybe another mechanism that we're not getting to because we're getting hung up on steep slopes. And then the secondary point to that is that I know that the steep slopes in some sense have been labeled potential protectorates, if we wanted to consider it that way, be it in a pre-application process. You know, it is what it is. Where we are now with the project, it got past pre-application, and it feels like what we're trying to explain is that it's not great design practices to tear down a hill to build a subdivision, but that's what we're here to discuss, is we're tearing down a hill to build a subdivision if this plan proceeds. Granted, there could have been other plans and things to do with that hill that preserved more of it. I think what we're trying to look at is the plan before us, be it our favorite design practice or not. It is the design practice, and therefore, if it's to move forward, then the erosion of the remaining land, the stormwater management, and those factors, the blasting even, like there's going to be environmental factors of removing so many of those steep slopes that are going to be more important to discuss than the actual percentage value of the steep slope itself. So I personally just want to kind of get to those discussions so that we can discuss whether the neighborhood's going to be affected by the blasting or not. Is the environment going to be affected by the blasting or not, rather than should we have blasted in the first place? Because this is the plan, and this plan includes blasting. So I want to get there personally.
Very well put. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Nice.
Marnie?
Well, I appreciate what Emil has to say. And I think that the pre-application process, my recollection is that we did not have the delineation of these slopes. I went back and looked at the map that I had at my disposal at that time, and it was black and white, and it wasn't, you know, to scale it to the extent that I didn't get a larger model. I regret that. But the decision has been made, and I think Emil's point is that because of the nature of this development, there are environmental threats that potential environmental threats, and they may well be addressed satisfactorily or not. But we have to consider the choices that have been made and how the potential erosion and sediment control will affect this development, and also how these buildings are sited when they're juxtaposed against such steep slopes, or conversely, when they're sited in a way that there's a drop-off in the backyard. So how are potential buyers going to view how these properties are sited when we have these kinds of, I hate to keep using the word steep slopes, but if you have a patio that's within 15 feet of a 10-foot slope, that might not be a real amenity. Or conversely, if you have a patio and 15 feet away, your grandchild could precipitously fall off a steep slope. I mean, so there are going to be ramifications for how this, how these buildings were sited on the developable acres. And again, we'll get to those details, but I think that Emil's point was just how this unfolded, and then to Corey's point, it is what it is at this point. But again, there may have been ways of reducing these potential environmental issues at the outset. And perhaps we were remiss in the pre-application process in not perceiving these and addressing them a little bit earlier. But again, to Emil's point, just because the pre-application process took place, the applicant was afforded the right to file the application. It may proceed, but that pre-application process was not a green light for a fast track approval of this project.
Rick,
Okay.
may I ask a clarification question about what Marnie said?
Go ahead.
Okay, it has to do with the location of the buildings versus the slope. Buildings are all at the bottom of the slope, is that correct?
That's not my recollection, no. Some
No,
are.
they're not at all. Some are not.
Well, I'm
Some are
looking at
not.
the drawing
want
and
me
it
to-
looks to me like they all are.
Perhaps
Off
I,
the slope. They're not at the top of that crest. That real high rock in the middle. Like there's three quadrants drawn on the picture that's on the screen. In the right-hand quadrant, there's a high mound in the top left corner. And the buildings are all clustered around the bottom of that.
So anyway, I'd like to hear like Bill thoughts. Bill Wheaton. You gotta unmute, Bill.
I don't think I have any more questions. I think with regard to the other opinions, we have to realize that this is a very difficult piece of land. Very difficult piece of land. It's not going to be developed without a fair amount of blasting because the dry part of the land is, forest and rocky and ledgy. And if it's going to be developed and if those expenses are going to be undertaken by any developer to blast and modify the hillside, it's going to take a fair number of units to cover that cost. So just the nature of the beast is that this is a site that's appropriate if it's going to be developed for cluster housing such as the petitioner has, whether it's 40 or 50 or however many units. That's really the only type of development that is economically viable on this piece of land, which has very difficult conditions and will require a lot of engineering expenses in order to make it work. And you have to cover those with a fair number of units. I mean, it is what it is. And I don't think, all due respect to Attorney Mann, I don't think her fallback single family development is in fact either economically or legally viable, but we can debate that in some other context. The part of the land that's developable happens to be ledgy, and that's going to be expensive to develop it, and you need a lot of cluster units to do it. And we have a cluster bylaw. So I think the type of development that was proposed here is appropriate for this, if you're going to develop this piece of land, it's appropriate. And we should get on with making sure that that type of development is done as conscientiously as possible, given the jurisdictions of our bylaws. That's it.
Good, thank you. Jonathan?
Yep. So I would caution folks not to interpret really any of what's being said as a kind of a binary approach to this, where it's developable or undevelopable, or where steep slopes have to be preserved at all costs or ignored at all costs. This is not a binary question. This is a qualitative question, and it's a matter of degree. And I think the task is to get into that degree, to look at what's before us and get into that degree. Now, I'd like to back up just a little bit, and there's a lot to talk about. I want to do a quick time check. It's 9:30.
Right, and we want to be respectful of not only our time, but the people that are participating outside the panel. So if you
I think what I'd like to do is
Yeah,
like
just,
to-
okay, hold on, Jonathan, hold
Yeah.
on. So if you could formulate either a question or a comment to what's been presented, that would be helpful, as opposed to a completely different new scheme of thought.
Well, what I'd actually like to do is just respond to a couple things, and then actually I'd like to give folks a homework assignment for next time. So, I think everybody's been thoughtful about their comments, and I think it's worthy to dig into these comments. And let's see, the first very specific thing I'd like to do is just mention that in the Massachusetts Erosion Sediment Control Guidelines on page 25, it doesn't say the definition of a steep slope is, but there's a very explicit chart about the three sort of grades of slopes: low erosion hazard, moderate erosion hazard, high erosion hazard. And the high erosion hazard is 18% or above. As I mentioned in a previous meeting, there's no absolutely universal agreement on what's a steep slope. It's generally between 15 and 25%. DEP does specifically say 18% and over is a high erosion hazard. And so I don't want to quibble over the percentage, but there is a range that becomes a steep slope. So I just wanted to mention that. And then what I think would be useful for folks to do for the next conversation is, while our own bylaws hint at some of the topics that we're talking about, they're not very granular. They direct us to some of the standards in the Massachusetts codes and standards, but they're not super descriptive. So I think there's some really accessible information that I would encourage folks to look at, and I'm gonna list it out verbally, and I'd be happy to share it in writing later. But I'm gonna stop talking. I just want to go through these references. So
Okay. Oh,
so the Massachusetts Stormwater Manual, Volume 1, Chapter 1, pages 1 through 3. So that's the first reference. Awesome to read, it's totally accessible, really explains some of this stuff. Next is Massachusetts Stormwater Manual, Volume 2, Chapter 1, pages 1 through 6. Only 6 more pages, okay? And then the next one's a little bigger, but it really digs into deep slopes. And that's Massachusetts Erosion and Sediment Control Guidelines, Part 1, pages 1 through 50. Yep, it's 50 pages, you can skim it. And I would encourage folks to read those references, and then let's have a conversation. And I'll stop there.
okay. So,
Mr. Chair, if I may chime in.
And I'd be happy to supply those in writing again. I'm happy to repeat it, whatever you'd like.
yeah, you can provide those in writing, and I do want to, Pat Norton, wanted to hear from you.
Hey, Rick, thanks. I'd asked my question. That was basically it. Everything else I think is covered.
Okay. So I think we've heard from,
The Granite wants to talk, Rick.
I'm sorry?
I do have one thing to discuss, and it just relates to Jonathan Poor's comment about the erosion control policy or the guideline that Massachusetts provides. He is correct. On page 25, there is a diagram that shows 18% slopes, 7 to 18% slopes, and 0 to 6% slopes. What Mr. Poor has failed to acknowledge is this guide is for proposed slopes, not existing. So it is very misleading when a proposed guideline gets put into the existing conditions, and then a leap for a definition gets proposed on the existing conditions plan that reflects what a steep slope is, although Hamilton nor Massachusetts DEP has a definition of a steep slope.
Understood,
the
and I've
document-
acknowledged that, and you can pick
Okay,
25%, you can pick whatever you
The
want.
document that is
let's not
before Mark is
no
actually for a
interrupting.
proposed slope and not for an existing slope. We actually have an erosion control plan that hasn't been acknowledged today that does mitigate those slopes that we have that are proposed at a 3-to-1 or greater.
All
Thank
right,
you,
very
Mr.
good, very good. So I think we've heard from all the board, and now you're going to hear from the chairman. I would, we're getting hung up on what might have been and what could have been and what should have been, but we're presented with what we have, and that's what we're dealing with. And we're getting hung up on minutia of steep slopes as if this were a critical factor in determining whether this is a viable project or not. It's one element of the discussion. There's so much more in front of us in terms of, I want to know what's going to go happen with the blasting plan. I want to see the hydrology, the geohydrology, because for me, that's the most important element in protecting the town's natural resources. The applicant has been very responsive to all the comments that we've made. They've demonstrated the desire to be amenable to changes that have been suggested. They haven't resisted anything. We're proceeding down a path that is dictated by our bylaws. We may not like them. They may not be clear. They may cause confusion. But in the end, we have to get through that information before we make any kind of decision as to whether all the elements balance out and equal a project that is acceptable or not acceptable. And continually get hung up on, minutia of what the design decisions were is not getting us to that point. It's going back and around in circles on what should have and could have been. That's not productive. And I'd like to see us move forward in a constructive and collaborative fashion to get answers to find out how the project is going to deal with drainage and protecting the wetlands and finding out how they're going to ameliorate the concerns about these steep slopes rather than fighting over what a definition of a steep slope is. And that's my comment. So I'd like to open this up to the public comment because they've been waiting patiently for 2.5 hours. So Pat Norton,
Yeah, Rick?
do you have access to the questions?
I do. There's a couple audience members with their hands up as well, but if you want to go through the questions first, we can do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Can you read the questions?
Sure. I wonder if I share my screen, you can all see them.
That would be great.
See if we can do that.
Actually, we can do that on our own if we want.
No, Richard.
Okay.
Let them.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We want everybody to see them.
Is this something you guys are looking at my screen now? The Q&A?
I'm looking at
Zoom
world
won't
map.
allow you to show Zoom, unfortunately.
Okay.
You can't share that. You would have to download them first and then share the downloaded file.
Okay, maybe I'll just go over them then. Jim Younger has asked a question about, does the new plan reduce blasting? Reduction in blasting is the only way to begin talking about low impact development.
Jill,
Yeah.
May I respond, Mr. Mitchell?
yeah.
Okay, yes, it does. So we're eliminating a blast all along the front and on the side. Yes.
Okay. Are there any units that are handicap accessible?
Not in the proposed condition. We do at times develop them because we pre-sell units. And if there is a person who is handicap or has a handicapped family member, then we will design accordingly. So it can happen. Right now, we don't have any construction plans, so can't answer that question really.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we'll go as an abutter. I disagree with Mr. Boroff's statement. It's been taking months to get details. The planning board needs to evaluate the full plans that it should, as Mr. Delaquist points out, should lead to an environmental impact statement, which has not yet been addressed. Furthermore, there has been no detailed sewage plan and leach field plan that has been submitted, which key determining the number of units that can be established and supported.
Well, I'm going to answer that, and then Jill, you can chime in if you need to. The septic plan is not the purview of the planning board. The Board of Health will determine if the engineering and design and capability of the septic system will meet the demands of the proposed project.
Right, the septic system design was approved. I mean, it's a pretty simple design and it had sufficient area and it's very clear what a senior housing development requires. 150 gallons per unit, and that's it. And the septic system is complete.
Okay, good. Next.
Yep. So the last question is, where are the rain gardens located and how big are they?
They're sprinkled throughout the entire site, but for that particular person at the not the next hearing, because I believe to Mr. Mitchell's point, that's our presentation where we have all of our experts and your peer reviewer for the blasting. But at the next hearing, or even at that one, I can distribute the rain garden plans, but they're all throughout the edge of the development.
Right. So that hits all the questions. Promoting Deborah Eliason to panelist. And there are two others with their hands raised. Good too.
Okay, Deborah. Are you there, Deborah? You're muted.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing the first thing that I would like to address is the issue of the pre-application. And the pre-application process is just that. It's a pre-application process. What's before you now is something that you can consider. Again, you can look at the design that's been presented. The design has changed since the pre-application process. So I think it's important that you realize that 8.1.12 is still in play. It's the design. It's not even part of the pre-application section of that part of the bylaw. And in it, it says specifically, to the extent feasible, the proposed development area shall consist of land outside the identified conservation areas. So it's something for you to consider. I'm not suggesting that you go back and redesign this project for the developer. That's up to them how they want to design it. But it is something that you are allowed to consider in your determination of whether you are going to approve this project and in what form and with what conditions if you do decide to approve it. What I'd like to do, I do have some other comments, but I would like to ask Elizabeth Ransom to be promoted so she could address some of the stormwater, some of the slope issues that have come up before I go on to other issues.
Okay, Patrick, can you there? She's there. Elizabeth, we don't see you and you're muted. There you are.
Am I unmuted now?
No, we hear you and we see you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. It's late and I'm going to try to be fairly brief in anything that I'm talking about. I know some of these issues we'll touch on again. I wanted to bring up, if you'll forgive me, slopes one more time. And partly, I believe that some clarification might really help the discussion or help our future discussions. As Granite Engineering pointed out, there is a distinction between existing condition slopes and developed condition slopes. And I think it would be really beneficial if we could all have a discussion that centers on some of the environmental considerations of how you get from existing condition to built condition or design conditions. I think we've previously talked about in meetings having the developer provide a detailed cut and fill analysis for the property. And this is not only so that we can talk about it in the context of the blasting, but it's also so we can understand how that gets done and why the stormwater manual and other references that have been talked about tonight talk about steep slopes is because when you're moving material and when material is being on the site, that's when you have an enormous potential for erosion. And that's when those steep slopes are most likely to be causing environmental harm. So I think one of the things that would truly benefit future discussions about the slopes and how the work gets done is having some additional detail from the developer about their cut and fill analysis and how they plan to stage this work. Because really that's how we're going to understand whether the existing conditions that remain as steep slopes or the new conditions that get changed into a slope that's not what we see today, all of that has a potential for environmental consequences if not appropriately conditioned by this board. And so, just to not beat a dead horse, I think there is more to say about slopes, but I think how we move the discussion forward is to get some additional information from the developer on how they're planning to do the cut and fill and how they plan to make that process happen. So that's really all I want to say at the moment about slopes. I wanted to just briefly also go back to the discussion of the mature woodlands. I think, from the stormwater perspective, the developer has, kind of redone some of their stormwater. I don't know that we've actually seen all those stormwater calculations. It'd be great to see them, but my overall impression is that some of the changes they've made by not, blasting the front entry should be favorable for the stormwater. But it is a different discussion from the one we probably will be having in a couple of weeks with regard to whether or not the removal of those mature trees is going to change the way in which we have infiltration and storage and groundwater recharge to the aquifer and the groundwater. So just kind of highlighting, again, it's a previous discussion from tonight, but I want people to kind of keep in mind that there are some other consequences to taking down trees that go beyond visual. With regard to the alignment where we kind of started tonight and the roadway and the fact that they're now leaving some additional area untouched, I think that's a positive change. It would be extremely helpful. I think actually, Chairman Mitchell, you're the one who originally asked for this. It would be extremely helpful to see an elevation and more of a simulation of what they're planning to do up there so that we can tell if the changes they're proposing are truly enough to make it feel like it's part of the neighborhood. It's a little hard to tell from what's been prepared and submitted so far. We can't really tell, but it seems like you could in fact still see some of these houses kind of distinctly from certain aspects on Shabaka Road, particularly as you are traveling south. And then, as I'm, kind of was talking about earlier, there are, we haven't really seen the applicants address the previous comments on the stormwater calculations and all the peer review calculations. But one of the things we note is that with some of the blasting and some of the changes to the landscape, there is a potential that some of the site areas that are classified as type A or B soils could in fact, be different under the proposed scenario. And so I guess we'd like some additional clarification on, what we're looking at, whether it's Class A, Class B, Class C, or Class D soils, because we certainly think that, with the changing dynamic of blasting the hillside, it could have implications for how stormwater calculations have been done. So I'm kind of going to let it rest there. I think most of it was just kind of, while we were on that discussion of slopes, I wanted to remind people that the cut and fill documentation would be really helpful in evaluating the plan that we have. And I guess one last thing before I kind of turn it back to Deb is we have seen already the applicant make some changes to their plans. I've been doing this kind of work for over 30 years, and it's not uncommon to ask an applicant for some additional details along the way that help you understand why are we where we're at. And it's not going back on us to say redesign your plan, but hey, you've got 3 houses over here that seem really close to a wetland. Is it possible for you to shift those over so that we're having fewer impacts? Present the board with alternatives as to why this is in fact the least impactful. I know the applicant's been doing some of those changes as we've gone along already. It's not unheard of to ask for some additional changes. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Elizabeth. Mr. Chairman, I have only a few other things, and I do understand that it's gotten late, and unfortunately, we haven't had an opportunity to say much through the meeting. Another conservation area that hasn't been talked about is wildlife habitats and wildlife corridors. And we've heard from the applicant that there's a lot of wildlife, but it's the woods, so don't worry about it. Well, that's something that is required to be considered. And tonight you may hear about some personal observations of protected species in that area. We will provide more additional information to you, but we do think it is incumbent upon the applicant to provide you with an inventory of the wildlife in this area, and to also determine whether or not there are any wildlife corridors that are being impacted by their development. With regard to this conservation restriction, we hear a lot about how it's going to be protected. And I just want to, this is something that certainly can be addressed by the applicant, but I think it's important for the board to understand. And I'd like to just share my screen for a moment. So can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the model, and this is the model CR that was put in their application. And so you can see here, it says plain text in brackets is optional or alternative language. So throughout here, we have alternate language. So until you're provided with the actual CR, you really don't know what it says. And one of the most important things, which is optional, which has been touted by the applicant, is public access. So it says here, delete if public access is not being granted. So you need to make sure that you actually get what they're going to send to the state and that you approve it. And that's, something that I just want you to keep on your radar because it's very important. All you have here is a fill in the blank model, and it's not the actual CR that's going to be proposed. With regard to the applicant mentioned that they now have different size units, and I'm wondering whether or not there is a list that shows what the sizes of those units are. The original narrative just said that it was, they were all within the same range. So if there's a list that we can look at, that would be very helpful to have. Let's see. Also, one question with regard to Mr. Boroff and the discussions we had with regard to the posting on the Hamilton Wenham Facebook site, wondering whether or not the retraction has been posted. I don't believe we've seen that. And if it has, if we could get a copy of that. And now I'd like to turn it over to other people on this call.
Okay. Patrick or Pat?
Yep. And there was one other question I actually missed. And it was regarding whether or not the new plans helped protect the help protect the wetlands or the water resource.
That's to be determined.
Okay.
There are, excuse me, Mr. Mitchell, there are some people who are trying to raise their hand to speak.
We're going to get to them.
It's not working. So I don't know if they should put a question.
Well, wait a minute. I want to find out from Pat.
Yeah, there's one, Robert, who, oh, I'm gonna promote now. Sarkinson.
Okay, there he is. Robert, you've been connected. You're muted and you're invisible. Robert, we can't hear you.
You might have lost Robert.
Okay.
How about this? Is that better?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the planning board for their best efforts in this project. And after all, you're just civilians and you're dealing with people who do this 24/7. I realize how difficult it is. I have two issues. I abut the property. If you look at that site map that was up before, there's lot 126 and 127 on Chewbacca Road. That's me. So I'm concerned about the blasting. I assume the only way to protect myself against any damage is to have the place inspected, thoroughly certified. And then if there's an issue, we have some remedy in court. So, okay, that's what I have to do. The second issue is water. There is a lake down Chewbacca Road, has a stream that comes across lot 127 and the adjoining lot. It feeds a pond on my property. The pond drains under Chewbacca Road and into the property that we're talking about. And the stream itself also does the same about 50 to 100 feet away from that. So we're going to be drilling a water main or Lord knows what. And my concern is that if they disturb that flow of water, one of two things is going to happen. Either my property is going to flood or the pond is going to dry up and turn into a wasteland. I don't know what to do about it by myself, but I would hope that someone would consider it. I suppose perhaps the Conservation Commission would be the people to talk to. Is that correct?
Well, well, first of all, before blasting, if it ever occurs, there has to be, the applicant will pay for surveys to be done or, and I don't know the distance from the blasting, Bill can answer that. There'll be paid surveys done of your property certifying its present condition. If there are any damage claims, then that will be paid for, I assume, by the applicant or their insurance. As to remedial on the water, I think we're going to get to that. We're going to look at the blasting plan in conjunction with the hydrology and the geohydrology. So we're going to be considering all the potential impacts as best we can to determine if there's going to be impacts and what those might be. Jill, if you have more clarification, please chime in.
Nope, you're exactly right. We have an insurance that is in place, and we will do a full inspection of your property to ensure that there's no damage. We'll have seismographs to measure any sort of vibrations. But the way, in fact, we schedule and set up the blasting is to ensure that there is no issue and that there isn't enough vibration across the street in particular. But I mean, that will be a discussion next week. I mean, I appreciate your concerns. We understand them and we're going to address them. And please, come to the meeting. I think it's January 25th. And at that time, our hydrologist will be there and explain how we will protect your property.
Okay, good.
Thank you for answering my questions. We shall see.
Okay, and then we have Ken Whitaker, I think. Ken, you are muted. Ken, we can see you on screen, but you are muted, so we can't hear you.
He's on a phone. Is there a certain button that he should push to unmute himself on a phone?
*6.
*6.
Heather Ensworth also has her hand up if you want to give her a shot in the meantime.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Heather, you're on screen, but muted. Oh, there you are.
Thank you. I know it's late, so I will just say a few things and submit something more in writing for the planning board to look at. But I appreciate, I'm Heather Ensworth, 4 Villa Road, and I appreciate the board's being sensitive to how ecologically sensitive this area is. And I feel like there hasn't been much discussion of the impact this is going to have on the very rare, pristine beech, hemlock, mature forest that's there in terms of the amount of destruction that's going to be done to this property, but also having known that land for years and been in interaction with other experts who've monitored the endangered plants and animals and birds that use that area. And I'll list them in detail when I send something in writing, but I think it's really critical that the board factor in the destruction of habitat fragmentation for impacting these endangered species that are on that property. Thank you.
Heather? Okay. Ken has evidently not been able to connect, so are there any other, Pat, are there any other people with their hands raised or?
I see no other hands raised, nor questions being asked in the chat.
Nor do I.
Okay, so I think it's probably appropriate to discuss that we will be continuing this hearing until the 25th, I believe it is.
That's correct.
So if nobody has any other comments, what I'd like to do is have a motion to continue the meeting to January 25th. Don't all jump at once, but you're not getting out of here until that happens.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to continue this
I'll
hearing
second.
until January 25th.
Okay, and Emil Dahlquist has seconded that. All right, so we'll go around to continue the hearing. Corey?
Aye.
Bill?
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Richard?
Richard Boroff, aye.
Emil?
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Marnie?
Barney Crouch, aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Poor, aye.
And Rick Mitchell, aye. So we're done with that part of the meeting. Patrick, I don't think there's anything else. We might have minutes, but my agenda has, oh, here it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have some minutes and Jonathan had some suggested edits to them.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry if I might interrupt. Do we know what the agenda will be for the next meeting? What topics will be on that, or is that going to be something that will be sent afterwards?
Well, it'll be sent out. I believe we're doing the blasting and hydrology.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, before we get to the minutes, I just want to point out with respect to the site plan review, section 10.6.13 of our bylaws provides that if we do approve a site plan, that we have to do that in writing. And I also want to point out that it was within our purview to deny the site plan review. So I think we should clear up any misconception that a site plan review has to be automatically allowed because the bylaw specifically says that a denial can occur, and it also has to be in writing. But obviously this farm proposal is something that the community and the planning board supports wholeheartedly, but we do have to make our approval in writing, and I'm sure the applicant would appreciate that as well for any kind of financing that they might need to get for these.
I will prepare a decision for the board that the board will sign at the next meeting. The only condition that I heard any of our members make tonight as part of that review is to have some cut sheet information relative to the technical parts of the greenhouses, which they sent to me electronically. So I'll make sure that's part of the decision, and that'll be to the board at the next meeting on the 25th.
Very good. Jonathan, you want to address the minutes?
Sure. Maybe I can share my screen, and the purpose of my potential edits and up for discussion here is I thought that a number of folks made some great points at the last meeting, and I didn't want them to get lost. So I would love each person who made the points to see if they agree with these edits. So the first up was Bill Wheaton. And I just struck one sentence that said, Mr. Wheaton noted that the process was not being bogged down in details, which appeared to work well. And instead I inserted, Mr. Wheaton said the purpose in sharing the project was to specifically make 2 points. One, the Hamilton had the opportunity to use the Great Estates bylaw to be more proactive in developing tax base through commercial development. And 2, the Ipswich Planning Board was very intentional about reviewing the project in a dialogue with the applicant that clearly prioritized looking at the big picture and reviewing the project as a whole before delving into details. He felt that Hamilton could take a lesson from this review format. So I would ask.
I agree with those. I agree with those.
Perfect.
Let me ask the question, Jonathan. Is this from memory or is this?
I watched the video in great detail. I watched the video 4 times.
Okay, thank you.
So for Emil, I crossed out this paragraph here that was about 80 to 90% of the time the board was listening and not talking, because that struck me as sort of background information. And instead, I tried to focus on his points. Emil Dahlquist said he wrote a letter to Patrick Ruffett requesting the board agendas be refined in 2 ways. 1, allow for more time for board discussion. 2, discuss and agree amongst the board what the agenda topics would be in advance and decide how much time would be allotted. Emil also said he believed a pre-application meeting was extremely important on any project in that it would streamline the hearing process. So that's Emil. So I would love to hear from Emil whether he agrees with that or not.
You're muted. Emil, you're muted.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's essentially what I said, right?
Okay, and then next was Marty Crouch, requested that the board review and discuss information regarding bylaw 8.1.12 prior to discussing the details of the entry revisions, as that was the proper order for the bylaws. So Marnie.
I agree. If I said it, I said it, and you watched the video again, so.
Yep, okay. And then the next one is me. Jonathan Poor endorsed the efforts and suggestions of Bill Wheaton, Emil Dahlquist, and Marty Crouch, and agreed that the next step was to discuss the big picture of the whole project rather than the entry area. So I agree with that. So I approve it. And then the next is Rick. Rick Mitchell said the entry modifications would have a significant impact on the entire design, and we should allow enough time for the applicant to present the information.
Sounds good to me.
Those are my edits.
Okay. Marnie, did you have any other comments?
No, I had no other comments, but perhaps, I don't know whether or not you could just make those corrections, the deletions that you suggest, and then just forward them on to Patrick.
Patrick
I don't-
already has them. Patrick
Oh,
has
he
them.
already has them?
Yep.
So I think that all that would need to be done would be the minor deletions and then eliminate the highlighting and they would be final minutes.
Yeah, and we can approve those with the changes as discussed and
Exactly.
approved. So
Exactly.
somebody want to make a motion to approve the December 24th meeting minutes?
I make a motion to approve the December 24th minutes and I applaud Jonathan for his significant contributions to them.
Okay, so we need to amend that. It's the 21st and
21st.
yeah. And
I
as,
second that.
okay. All right. Can we all have a unanimous vote to approve? And say aye?
I
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, okay, unanimously approved.
I move to adjourn.
Oh,
Second.
no, wait, there's a lot more to go over. No, I'm kidding. All right, do we have a second?
Second, I second it.
All right, everybody in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
It's unanimous. The board is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night and we'll see you on the 25th.
Get to go to dinner now.
Yeah, all right.